still shows you with your hand raised, which means you might need to pop out and back in. That usually fixes it. And welcome back, everybody. Let's get into all of the top headlines. Anyone burning with a really super special hot one?
But Tyler, the only thing I would bring up is because it's just breaking news. I think I tweeted out the Los Angeles Times article on it, but it's also in the Wall Street Journal that the federal United States government, their national highway safety organization, whatever it's called, is investigating Tesla because of reports that its autopilot cannot detect emergency vehicles, or there's been incidents where it fails to detect emergency vehicles. With the lights flashing, and
Yep.
and so
I've got the article right here. It says U.S. government opens probe into Tesla autopilot crashes with emergency vehicles. Well, if you are going to crash into something, an ambulance would be the safest thing to crash into, assuming you don't ruin it and it can take you to the hospital. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has opened a probe into Tesla's autopilot software, citing the car's repeated collisions with parked emergency vehicles. That is truly ironic. The investigation will cover Tesla models Y, X, S, and 3 vehicles released from 2014 through 2021. The federal agency says since 2018 it has logged 11 incidences. Holy shit, this is weird. Which includes 17 injuries and 1 fatality in which Tesla vehicles using the company's autopilot features have crashed into stationary emergency vehicles, ambulances. The agency says most of these incidences took place after dark, with the software ignoring scene control measures, including warning lights, flares, cones, and illuminated arrow boards. This is getting really weird. That's a whole lot of warnings. That's like, you don't miss that.
It almost seems deliberate. I mean, I know that sounds
like
tinfoil
they were
hat-ish.
hacked or something. Yeah, that seems really bizarre. Like, there's nothing more obvious than the flares and all of the lights and sirens and all that stuff.
it could also be fire trucks and some other things. Not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
ambulance.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the most obvious stuff on the road.
They have those giant chevrons on the back of them.
Yeah, a spokesperson, the investigative stage, it's in the preliminary stages and primarily concerned with uncovering additional information about the incidences. The spokesperson noted that the public should be aware that no commercially available cars are able to drive themselves, and vehicles always require a human in control at all times, etc., etc. So more to be continued. Unfortunately, there's not yet a comment from Tesla, but I imagine it's bound to come up. Someone is bound to ask Elon that in all of the upcoming interviews that he does, right? So no doubt, as he's known to do, he'll likely jump on Twitter preemptively whenever he's got an official comment to make about that. But I'm tweeting the article out, and thank you, Ken, for that one. That is truly wild.
Tyler, can you try John Madison?
Yeah, I did already, and I told John that
they went out and come in again.
Yeah, I think
they went out and came in, and
and welcome back, Monica. Is it?
Hey, Monica.
Are we up to 23 yet or not? That's the big question everyone wants to know.
Hey Tyler, we were up to 23 last week. Now
oh my God!
Get with the program, Tyler.
Oh my God! And now we're counting IPOs.
Absolutely, one was announced on Friday.
Jesus, my God, India, the unicorns. If you don't know what we're talking about the relentless epidemic of unicorns being born up in and around the India region of planet Earth, where there's a whole lot of out of control Indian unicorns being born.
Decacorn too.
Yeah, they got a couple decacorns and a whole lot of IPOs coming up. Truly unprecedented, and it even has the Prime Minister last week even spoke very highly of how it is reflects the new modern face of India. As I agree, it does. It's uncommon for prime ministers to recognize it as such. And I actually, as much as we might give Modi a whole bunch of shit at times, I gotta applaud his recognition of the Indian unicorns, which I think are absolutely key to keeping the the future of India exciting, and it certainly changes my whole impression of India, and I imagine it does for anyone else who understands what that many unicorns in that short amount of time is just really unprecedented. So, I mean, even across even across Europe, I mean, even if we took Europe as a singular kind of state entity, it's still a lot for. It's more than even Europe has done in 20. I don't think we've had 22 new European, although maybe we did because Sweden alone, as Johan knows and Swedbliss might know, Sweden this year has done about 9. So we're at about half, a little less than half of what India's done, and we only have 10 million people. So on a percentage basis, we're still doing okay on a per population basis.
I think it's also because of their culture, right? They are very hungry and very driven. And I also heard that many of them have left Silicon Valley to go back into India to do unicorns.
Well, they embrace tech, that's for sure. And I mean, when you go, I've said this before, I've said it a number of times, but when you go to actual Silicon Valley, which is, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, right? And, Los Gatos, when you get into actual Silicon Valley proper, and you go to the campuses, when you have friends that work there. And by the way, Sid still owes me the world's best pizza over there at the Apple campus. I'm not going to let him off the hook for that. He claims Apple has the best pizza you'll ever have. I find that very hard to believe. But when you do visit your friends for lunch at Google and Yahoo and Amazon, LinkedIn or Intel, as I've done many times, you will be, the first thing you'll say to yourself is, holy cow, am I in India? That, honest to God, that's the first thought that comes to your mind, because those campuses are crawling with folks from India and China, and in a way that really catches you off guard. Like you're just not prepared for it. And it's and then you go to Fremont, which is where most of the folks who work in Silicon Valley live, because you have these mega campuses all over Sunnyvale and Mountain View, and then you realize that they all live just across the bottom of the bay there, the San Francisco Bay Area in Fremont. And when you get to Fremont, and we were happy that we even had, what was it, the deputy mayor of Fremont jumped in here one time, and lovely smart guy as he is, and rated amongst one of the best cities in America in terms of growth on many metrics. And lovely city, absolutely lovely place. And I've spent many a weekends there, as my former partner, who herself is of a Chinese family, who is an engineer at Intel. And so I used to spend most of my weekends there. And it's a lovely, lovely town of Fremont. And that town is nearly entirely a beautiful blend of Chinese and Indian, living very peacefully, all together in one little town there, which I have to say, wouldn't that be nice if that was the case, along the Himalayas, where, India and China have a lot of friction with each other, and but not in Fremont. I mean, it's, it's a beautiful team there. Anyway, I'm getting off track.
Pot.
Yeah.
Tyler,
Yes.
I think to chime in with this, with the Tesla hitting emergency vehicles. In Europe, all emergency vehicles and all vehicles that are working on the road are required to have a special pattern called Battenberg. The Battenberg pattern is required by all emergency vehicles in the whole of Europe to have. And these are the large colored fields that on the police cars, they are green and no, they are on the ambulances, they are green and yellow. On the police, they are blue and red, etc., etc., and blue or yellow. And the thing is that this is a patented pattern that you actually have to have on your emergency vehicle. And since I've been working with a large truck company in Sweden, where we actually have cameras in the front of the truck,
I'm gonna guess
it
Ganya.
Now it's Volvo. Well, since I'm in Gothenburg, the thing is that so if it detects in your line a still standing Battenberg pattern, the truck will give you a very, very audible signal, because this with hitting the TMA trucks. TMA is these trucks that they put up before road construction work. They are also required to have this specific pattern on the rear and the side and the front of the car or the truck, so that the cameras, at least in the Swedish, I only know of Volvo, both the cars and the trucks and the buses surveillance system, they detect this pattern and react very, very audibly when it detects it in your lane. So this is something that I know after seeing quite a few American movies, that you don't have these patterns on your cars. The police cars are usually just white with a logo on the door, more or less, and standing sheriff or something like that. So this might be something for both the whole country as well as Tesla to actually acknowledge. Johan Dunn.
Thank you, Johan.
We do have those. What we call them chevrons. I don't know about the trade name, but it's a V pattern, correct, Johan? Like a V pattern of alternating
No,
reflective colors, or
yeah, if you look up Battenberg pattern, you will see it's square boxes in a myriad of different combinations. Green and yellow for ambulances, blue and yellow for police in some countries, blue and orange in other ones. Road construction vehicles in Sweden is blue and yellow. No, blue and orange. Sorry, I mixed them up. The Battenberg pattern is a high visibility thing that is done for computers and people to react to.
But Chris is right. We have a pattern too here. It might not be the one you're talking about in Europe, but we have them on emergency vehicles.
Yeah, which makes it very peculiar indeed. So, thank you once again to Ken for that very interesting first article.
Tyler, just a quick thought.
Yes.
A couple of years back, all the big tech companies were located in Kabul, Afghanistan. We had plans to build an extended arm of tech companies in Afghanistan, and look at where we have come now.
Do you happen to know which companies were there?
Yeah, Google, Microsoft, they had their offices, small offices,
Really?
and also General Dynamics, Honeywell, TCS, a lot of Indian small companies. They had, they had the plans, and why not? Kabul. It-
That's really
all of
interesting.
all of Kabul infra was built by, actually, it was positively built by India, uh, uh, and the plan was to also have this the connection, the Middle East connection. It was sort of an alternate to BRI project. It's quite long thought, like from India to Iran, Afghanistan, and then Central Asia.
I got to be honest, that's the first I've heard of that, and I'm quite surprised.
Oh, I just realized there's a google.com.af website.
Okay.
There's Microsoft, all of those.
I wonder what Google has, campuses, many have offices pretty much everywhere. So I'm curious, and in the different locations, they focus on different things. So you have the Google Maps team is quite strong in Tokyo, for example, where they're doing all of the AR additions that the Google Map team is working on is coming out of Tokyo. And then there's, Google Photos is very strong out of the Venice Beach office, for example. And then you've got, but they spread out all over. But different areas tend to have some types of emphasis. So I'm really curious to know what kind of emphasis they had in Kabul for the Google office there.
Mainly outsourcing, but yeah, there are others.
Okay. So the first headline of the day, going back to our kind of traditional, and Johan just sent me the Battenberg markings of the emergency vehicles for at least Sweden, but it seems like it's kind of a European standard, is looks very, very similar to the it's for Europe, and it looks very, very similar to what we have in America. But theirs is more of the European one is more of a checkerboard, where the European one is more of these diagonal lines that form V's kind of all over the back of the vehicle. So thank you for that, Johan. And the first biggest story at this very moment, happy Monday, August 16th, is that T-Mobile's investigating claims that hackers stole data from its servers, including phone numbers, names, social security numbers, and driver's license info. Pretty much everything except your tax records, which in America would be impossible to find anyways. That's only the IRS has those. But that's about all any one company could have of an American is their phone, their social security, and their driver's license. Maybe a bank account number is the only thing they don't seem to have. Related to more than 100 million customers, which I have to imagine is all of T-Mobile's customers, because T-Mobile is one of the big 3 or 4 American telecom mobile companies, and there's only 350 million Americans, so they probably have about 100 million users, and so if they're hacked for 100 million, that's pretty much all of them. Hackers selling the data are claiming it affects 100 million users and are selling it on the dark web, as hackers are known to do, where they exchange and sell data. T-Mobile is saying they're investigating it, which no doubt they are, but it seems that it's quite verified from the hacker perspective. I mean, they're selling it, for God's sake. So, to be determined.
Do you want to have a link to it?
Yeah, you absolutely would love to. And we brought this up when we met. We meet twice a day, as most of you know, if you don't click on the title of the room to see our schedule. And when we spoke of it, when we met last, I said, well, I'm looking forward to Johan joining us in the next session, as he is now here, as predicted. And I knew you would have some additional color to add to this story. So.
The thing is here, with 100 million, this is probably one of the largest leaks that have hit the market ever.
Yeah.
There are not many platforms that you could actually get hand on so many different people's different credentials, etc.
Yeah.
The leak that only is similar is the LinkedIn one, when they blow that into pieces about 5 years ago. But then they didn't have all these sensitive information. They only had the mail and perhaps if you have a good phone number. But this is really remarkable.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, LinkedIn had to pay a settlement for that, like there was a class action suit or whatnot. So I imagine
a large one. They tried to put an arrow on the bowstring in Europe to go after them here also, but they thought, no, it's an American company. You need to take it to the States if you want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But with the GDPR now in place and working, they would have been killed probably.
Right. Ken, you were going to say?
Story on that apparently, I guess T-Mobile has already basically paid the ransom to whoever had done the hack to cure it. But I also think as a result of this, you should see, doesn't mean it will happen, some sort of reform. They shouldn't have had to have social security numbers, and the only reason they would have social security numbers is because they were running credit checks for postpaid plans. And I think when you balance out the risk of them having the social security numbers versus them taking some credit risk, I think there's probably going to be a reform where you're just not going to be able to run a credit check using a social security number because you can't trust them with a social security number.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to lean harder on these services like Klarna and the Bill Me Now, Bill Me Later. I mean, that's going to probably be crucial to the future of ongoing lending, at least for non-large assets, meaning home, car. I mean, I think the small stuff, there's no reason they need your social security number to loan you a $1,000 phone.
They also have your phone. Every phone has a unique IMEI device number, which they also have.
Yeah.
That's also part of the leak.
That's huge.
That changes the game a little bit. So they now know the identities of every device behind it. That's kind of wild. So there's somebody tweeted, "I love T-Mobile service, but this looks like a pretty big deal. Data protection strategies have to include heavy scrutiny of what data is being stored and where. Do social security numbers and driver's license information all need online access?" And for those who don't, for the Europeans, they might be a little confused because in Sweden, your your personal number, as it's called in Sweden, is essentially public. I mean, loosely public. They don't protect it, and it's not like this sacred, never show even your mom type number like it is with social security numbers in the U.S. So, having your social security numbers leaked as part of your address and your name, and the scary part is, even if T-Mobile acquires this data back, it still exists in a database somewhere that, for example, the hacker, of course, is going to say, okay, here it is, all back safe and sound, and thank you for the $50 million or whatever the ransom is. However, if they keep a copy of that data and use it as a cross-reference database in the future, it continues to be incredibly valuable for the foreseeable future, because you now have a third of Americans with their social security numbers tied to their IMEI numbers, tied to their addresses. That's just insanely valuable cross-reference database for hackers.
And the thing is here that there is already leaks from this data pool. Among things, you can buy your social security number and the phone number for Sandra Bullocks or whatever you're looking for. All the customers, all the VIP that use T-Mobile, they have their information. There are rumors that there are a couple of porn stars that actually have had their numbers leaked this way already, and this is not old data at all.
I didn't peg you for a Sandra Bullock's fan, Johan, but
that was what I was
just an
going to
example.
say.
so
Hey,
Remember
Tyler,
also, hi,
one of the
Tyler.
stories that came out, I was going to say very quickly, one of the stories that came out is that apparently they're only asking $260,000 ransom, not $50 million. It's
What?
amazing. Yeah, there's a story.
No, they are selling the complete database for $250,000. That's the link I have.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, so we're saying the same thing. Yeah,
250,000.
It's not a
6
ransom.
Bitcoin.
You can buy the complete lot for $250,000. And people have already been doing this, and they
That's
are
a
now
good deal.
selling
Anyone want to chip
phone
in and get this
numbers.
database?
Yeah, I was gonna
That's
say
a
let's
good
do that.
deal. 100 million email list for $250,000.
That's a great deal. Not just an email list; it's an SMS list. I can start SMS spamming all these people with their first names, and their social security numbers, so I know their credit scores. I can sell all kinds of products to these people directly to their SMS.
Yeah, and I have a couple of hundred different scam schemes and scripts we can use. So give me the list, pay it up, and I will help
Yeah,
you to
that's a
make
hell
a
of a
lot of
deal.
money.
Jesus, wow! What does that come out to per email per SMS number? that's cheap. That's
a rounding error.
50 cents each or something like that.
I'm wondering.
Not even that.
Not even that. It's
Not even
5
that.
cents
We
each.
got $1,000 a person in this room. We could get this covered today.
Who's in? With all due respect, it makes me seem like this must be Belarus from Moldova, because it being one of the cheapest places on the planet to live, it seems like somebody who doesn't quite understand the value of this data, who lives in a rather not somebody from Manhattan, I can assure you of that, or Tokyo or Hong Kong, where they would have for sure.
Imagine this now: if you put this up and sell for $250,000 15 times. Versus the focus you get if you get $50 million for one time. It's quite easier to manage. And the thing is, we give 15 different wallets to pay to for these ones. So even if whoever tracks them down and blocks one of your account, you still will have 14 or 12 of them left to work with. So I can see that it's a smarter affair to actually go for less money and sell them more.
I did the numbers. It's $0.0025 per name, so that's 2.5 cents.
There we go.
Okay, I think Google will buy this.
I think a lot of ad networks are going to buy it.
Well, by the way, Tyler, so there's also a possibility that this is just a hacker's claim and it's not true, and then that's why the price is low, so he can sell multiple numbers of this to people who think it's a great deal, and then you're selling them something that's really not worth anything.
Now this raises the question: who will be the first hacker to put their findings on an NFT?
Exactly.
Yeah, license it out, and so you can have to the top 10 bidders each get different levels of permission. Really start using this NFT thing to its full capabilities. So the next big headline.
There's actually a meta link that I just found that probably leads to this one.
Send it,
So it
DM it
might
to me,
be
Johan.
I don't know if I want to be part of that chain. Sorry,
Okay.
sir.
All right, no problem. So the next one is from our very favorite friends at Bloomberg, which a lot of people reporting this one, that Google and Facebook, you've heard of these companies? They're big tech companies. You may have heard of them. Google and Facebook say they will participate in a subsea cable system linking Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, Guam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, launching in 2024. And as I've said, more and more of these big, important internet and infrastructure cables are being done by the big tech companies. Obviously, that wasn't always the case because these companies are relatively new to Facebook, for example. 2000. Only in the past 20 years. So, but the fact that they are really starting to disproportionately be adding all of this new infrastructure that is critical to the internet, when I make this kind of half joking comment about the power of these companies versus these governments, that's Asia. I mean, with the exception of China. So, I mean, I didn't mention Vietnam, but Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, Guam, Philippines, Indonesia. Holy shit, that's a huge chunk of Asia, excluding China. So I have to wonder how that would impact, for example, Twitter's, or let's use Facebook's. Had a little bit of friction with India a few months ago around WhatsApp. If Facebook was providing much of the internet cabling to India, would that have changed those negotiations? And that's why I bring this up, and especially when they start doing the satellite connection as well. And when they start getting into medtech and edtech and fintech and e-commerce, when the future of commerce starts happening inside of Facebook, which we know that's going to happen in the very near future. It's already happening. I mean, Lakeisha and I can tell you a real big percentage of commerce is starting to happen through Facebook in Thailand specifically. So this becomes it's starting to become key infrastructure, like unremovable level of infrastructure inside of the economies of these countries. And then next thing you know, you're beheld to Facebook and Google for their infrastructure and the amount of relevance to your economy. It makes it quite a political power in your own territories. Is quite an interesting point. So, everyone else is reporting this as well. Reuters says Facebook and Amazon ask the FCC, the Federal Communications, for approval for a new undersea data cable between Philippines and California. So clearly, it's coming from. That makes sense that this undersea cable would originate in California, probably from the Bay Area. if I had to take a wild guess where the cable originates with Facebook and Google. And Facebook and China Mobile and MTN Group plan to expand an undersea cable network in Africa, adding the Seychelles, Comoros, Angola, and Nigeria, and 35 landings. So again, another Facebook infrastructure cable for Africa. And so you've got Asia and Africa. It's getting really interesting, and there will potentially be down the road someday a political element to that kind of definitely entrenches somebody. I mean, I wonder to what degree could Google. It certainly helps Google. It definitely makes. And I would love to have a sysadmin who knows this. Maybe we could ping somebody in, or if someone in the audience happen to have a really strong background on this point. Clearly this is of a benefit to Google in terms of its speed between of Google's services and products in those areas where they lay this capability, this infrastructure, versus their competitors. So we have to imagine there's an inherent benefit for them doing this, obviously, or they wouldn't do it. So it'd be really interesting to know what kind of benefits they get from doing this. In addition,
That's all I was gonna say. The other thing for Africa, it's really important because you've had pretty monopolistic price gouging by the older undersea cable companies, which really affects the landlocked African countries. Like Zambia, Malawi, and they have some high data costs. And so I
Mali,
think this will be interesting when they start expanding. Google, like encouraging more ISPs to come into the game and connect with their cables. That will help lower the cost of internet in Africa, which is still very expensive, by the way. It's the most expensive in the world. So I think this is encouraging for that reason. If they kind of make sure that more ISPs are encouraged to connect and it helps lower the overall backhaul pricing, this will be really good for Africa.
Yeah, and there's another example there where Facebook in Asia, for example, they've long been doing it in Indonesia and the Philippines, very notably, where they subsidize and make Facebook data free. So people get phones, and in Myanmar as well was a place where largely the internet was Facebook, because you could use Facebook for free and everything else you had to pay for. And in Myanmar, they don't have a lot of discretionary income to pay on internet data, where it's not necessarily that cheap. And but using Facebook data for free, they come up with all kinds of really interesting ways to use Facebook when it's the kind of the only, easy means. They start using it for all kinds of stuff, and it becomes for them the internet, very literally. So they even, in some places, Indonesia, like people are in Facebook so long that after growing up with it, they just think of it as the internet, and you'll hear Indonesians even refer to it in that way. You were going to say, Chris?
I think that when you think about it, the Philippines is in the southern hemisphere. It's in Southeast Asia. If satellites are going to be a thing, they're going to need some kind of source for the backhaul for these satellites that are in the southern hemisphere. So this also may be a play too, because the Philippines would provide them a site to provide their, the main line to the internet for the satellites. So I don't know how much that comes into play, but that's kind of my 2 cents.
Okay. And then actually the third biggest story is the Tesla story that Ken shared at the top about the formal investigation into Tesla's Autopilot, which is covering 765,000 vehicles, saying it has trouble spotting parked emergency vehicles. And then the fourth biggest story is from the Wall Street Journal. The headline says, "A look at chip makers' race to capitalize on wave of subsidies as U.S. and other Western countries reassess their industrial policies to slow China's rise." From the Wall Street Journal. U.S. semiconductor makers appeal for subsidy plays on national security fears during chip shortage. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And what they're saying essentially is Intel and everyone is saying, "Hey, Uncle Sam, wake the F up and give us billions of dollars to domesticate all of our chip production, because we don't want to have any kind of potential friction with anybody else. We want to domesticate this, own this top to bottom, left, right, and back to front." Because with it coming from Taiwan as it is, as much as TSMC has shown itself to be a real friend and a fantastic company in every regard, it's not comes with a bit of anxiety. So wouldn't it be lovely to have this all internalized? So of course Intel and all of the American companies are asking and kind of asking for the big subsidies, which means government handout money essentially. And the government understands the importance of it, and it seems like they are playing ball. And the other point is there's a really interesting other one. TSMC is a really interesting company in itself, and there's another one in the Netherlands, which is essentially the company that makes the tool that makes it possible to make the semiconductors. This amazing lens company, ASML, which if you don't have their machines, you're not going to be able to make the machines necessary to make the top of the line semiconductors. And America's trying to monopolize and the relationship with that company out of the Netherlands, so that basically no one else will be able to do it. Although no doubt they'll let their allies in the UK and Germany and Japan and others, but the idea is to keep it all out of the hands of the Chinese. So a related story from South China Morning Post, which is directly connected to this Wall Street Journal article, and South China Morning Post is from China, as the name kind of implies. And their headline today reads, Chinese government says integrated circuit output rose 47% in the past year to 203 billion units in the year up till July, as new capacities added to meet semiconductor demand. Okay, that's groovy. And going back to the Wall Street Journal article, the headline says Intel CEO pitches pricey chip plants to officials at home and abroad. U.S. semiconductor makers appeal for subsidies on national security fears during chip shortage. So it all is quite easy. Big points, but very important points with this global chip race going on. And it's become a very geopolitical issue, and we're trying to block, just to be really blunt about it, America's trying to block China from getting better at chips. It's as simple as that. And they're really trying to domesticate all the chips. And by the way, hold on to that idea. Hold on to that point that I'm making right there, because it will come into play in about 20 minutes in a very big way, that the U.S. is very strongly wanting to domesticate all of its chips. And there's a whole separate point, by the way, related to Afghanistan. Believe it or not, this comes back to Afghanistan and why we left Afghanistan, believe it or not. And I will explain that connection when we get to the Afghanistan headline that I know we have coming up in about 20 minutes. But in the meantime, the fifth biggest story is that the information, which does a lot of investigative journalism, says they have sources. And the sources are saying, seeking greater control, the Chinese government took a stake and a board seat in TikTok in April. And more specifically, in their parent company, which is called ByteDance. For months, China has sought to bring its bustling internet sector to heel with an intensifying series of antitrust crackdowns and data security probes. And in one example that hasn't been previously reported, the Chinese government in April quietly took a stake, meaning part ownership, and a board seat in TikTok owner ByteDance key Chinese entity, according to corporate records and people with knowledge of the matter. The move gives Beijing more insight into the inner workings of ByteDance, the world's most valuable privately held tech company, which owns some of the most popular apps in China, such as Douyin and Toutiao, along with TikTok. The government's rise to one seat on a 3-person board, holy shit, that's a very small board, at Beijing ByteDance, which holds Chinese business licenses related to Douyin and Toutiao, raises questions about how much more influence Beijing can exert over TikTok. And now that information is now released, and they're saying nobody knew this until they say they have the exclusive on this. So that means that the journalists and editors at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, and everybody else are now going to work to try and verify this exclusive revelation from the information, which I will tweet out to you now for your convenience. And if confirmed to be true, the American government is likely to ban TikTok. You heard that here first, because it was already concerning enough that TikTok might be providing information to the CCP, and this just makes it too obvious to ignore. So, if they were looking for a reason, they certainly have one now. So we'll see how that shakes out.
I hate to stir the pot, but it looks like maybe a former unpopular president may have been right about TikTok.
Well, but by the way, there were TikTok. TikTok has an American arm, like TikTok US, where they had a CEO from Disney, and to try and keep it alive when Trump was trying to force it to sell itself to Oracle, strangely, which is a friend of Trump's, by the way, Larry Ellison. So anyway, it gets very interesting.
That guy left, Tyler. The guy from Disney left.
Yeah. The guy from Disney left. That's true. Yes, I was going to get to that, but the point is that many of the American team members said, and somebody this kind of journalism happens all the time, where you interview former team members at Apple to find out what's really going on at Apple. Well, in this case, they interviewed former team members at TikTok US, and they said Beijing's running the show. Like, there's no real wall of veil of separation between TikTok Beijing HQ and the US. Like, they even forced us to kind of work Beijing hours to give you some kind of indication as to how much Beijing's running the show. So that doesn't help. But this revelation that of the Information's headline saying they have the exclusive that Beijing now has, the CCP has one of the 3 board seats of the company. 1 out of 3. That, I mean, they just politically could control it, just on the votes and all that. I mean, it was also an interesting related headline about a week ago, was that the CCP's ministry around art and literature and culture came out to say, we now want to have more influence in the algorithms of the social media networks, because we want people to be exposed to better content, to kind of simplify their point and to be kind of gracious in their point, and that they felt we need to raise the bar on the type of the type of content that people are consuming, because we don't want this kind of lowest common denominator crap content. This is really their own words, and they specifically called out celebrity gossip type content, which people were getting a little too interested in mainland China, and they didn't like that at all. And they felt people were getting a little too interested in kind of this senseless kind of what were vulgar kind of dancing, which we have to assume they're referring to twerking or something along those lines. So the vulgar content, they don't want to see so much of that being emphasized by the algorithms of the social media platforms in mainland China. They specifically want more Marxist critical theory in literature being consumed. And you think this sounds crazy, but even since that headline came out last week from the ministry itself, I mean, they provided a quote we're quoting them from their own government agencies here. And then there was another headline just in the past 3 or 4 days, was there not, Cheryl, that students going back to school this year will no longer have an emphasis on English, but rather an emphasis on quotes of the CCP chairman Chairman Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping quotes.
Right. Yeah, his top blockbuster quotes are now going to be memorized by students.
Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy.
Uncle Xi's Deep Thoughts.
Hey, Tyler.
Yes.
I just want to add that, someone did comment and say, well, the prior president was correct on this. But I want folks to know that the current president is aware too. And so if you paid attention to when the current president came in and repealed executive orders from the prior one, the changes that he made regarding this social media was just to tone down the language that kind of made Americans judge the Chinese people as a whole. And that's all that changed. And so I don't want people to think like there's a political difference to how it's been handled, because it seems as if both are still aware. And I only know this because I went and actually read the language as it was revised for that executive order.
Thank you for that. So the next big headline at this moment is it's a blog post, a Q&A interview with the person at Apple who's kind of steering this whole new child safety photo scanning issue that's got all the geeks all riled up. And by the way, there's another interesting article coming up in 20 minutes on a separate but interesting new angle on it, which I'll try and find for you right now. But this article I'm tweeting out, it's basically an interview with Alex Stamos on this Apple's proposed child safety feature. It's not proposed, it's baked into the operating system that's coming out in 2 weeks. So there's no stopping that train, actually.
There's a new operating system coming out from Apple.
The iOS 15.
Scan everyone's pictures for child pornography.
Yeah, child abuse, they're calling it. But the point is that's not something they could just
You have a lot of children on your phone, so
and in the
just make sure none of it is you hitting a kid.
Yeah, you're quite soft on your mic, David.
No, that's good. It's my wife runs the child care.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're just explaining. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Because you take pictures, you want to share pictures.
Yeah.
But we don't do any of that. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, kind of like, oh God,
Yeah.
here we go.
Hold on, I really want to find this.
Sorry about that, wife. But
yeah. So hang on.
This had real implications. I'll unmic. Sorry.
So check this out. Here's a related headline from Wired. And Wired is one of the few publications where they actually have legit geeks writing the articles over there, and always have, started by Kevin Kelly. And so Wired, this is one of my favorite tech publications, as it is for every geek I know. And their headline is related. It says, Apple and Google still have an LGBTQ problem, which just on the face of the headline seems a little odd because Apple CEO Tim Cook is part of the LGBTQ community himself. So I don't know they have that big of a problem. But their point is that Apple and Google still have the problem. Silicon Valley should get out of the business of regulating sexually explicit material. Its actions against not safe for work material put marginalized groups at even more risk. And the LGBT community is concerned that their content is likely to be next in this scanning process, which given maybe they're not aware, maybe a lot of them are not aware that Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple and that he's part of their community. So I'm not entirely sure that's incredible, given that that fact. Hopefully that isn't, hopefully their fears are hopefully misplaced. And hopefully that gives them some kind of comfort in that fact. So, but Google, I don't know, that there's certainly a point there, which is once the tech platforms start looking for sexually explicit materials, as they say, they rightfully get a little bit anxious. So it's an interesting point that we have not considered thus far. So anyway, the next biggest headline is from the Wall Street Journal, and others are reporting, in a new lawsuit, a U.S.-based company is claiming that Huawei stole their tech and pressured them to build a backdoor into their own architecture into a sensitive surveillance project in Pakistan. And we actually read this one yesterday, but this one's so big that it took the mainstream media an extra day to kind of understand the importance of this. It's tremendous. This is really huge. And the timing of it is also really peculiar, because this is like an incredibly damning, kind of jaw-dropping claims against Huawei, that Huawei, let's put it this way, China and Pakistan are very economically close with the Belt and Road Initiative, where it's one of China's biggest investments globally is in Pakistan, because they happen to be China's bordering country that allows them to get via land to the Persian Gulf, which is going to become incredibly important for China in the near future, when they're no longer going to be able to move all of the Persian Gulf oil via the oceans to China as they do today. And they're not going to be able to do that because America is going to withdraw the protection of our Navy on the deep blue seas, which is currently what affords them the ability to do that. And you heard that here first, if you haven't heard that before. And it's also related to why they're pulling out of Afghanistan and everything else. So America's withdrawing, and that's going to leave China incredibly vulnerable to get the incredible amounts of energy it needs from the Persian Gulf, which they currently do through oil tankers. About half of their energy comes that way. And that means they are going to be really, really, really in a tight spot to try and move those oil tankers past 12 countries who hate them, including one named India, who now has an aircraft carrier they just launched last week. Good luck moving.
It's a second aircraft carrier.
Okay,
But
thank you for that, Armish. My point, though, is that the reason China is so heavily invested in Pakistan is because it's right through China's back door, kind of just below Xinjiang in Tibet, connects through the Himalayas with Pakistan, and that gives them a land route to the Persian Gulf, essentially right to the doorstep of the Persian Gulf, so they no longer have to, so they can build a pipeline, which they've are no doubt doing. So that's why you have to understand the fundamental importance of Pakistan, and now you know why Huawei, how that relates to this story that I'm reading about Huawei screwing this American tech company over selling the technology to Pakistan. So what happened is Pakistan sends out a request for proposal. They want new tech for their police departments. And Huawei says, we would love to make a proposal. And so they do. The problem is Huawei doesn't have the tech that enables what the Pakistani police departments want. So they find the company who does have the tech, which is this company in Santa Ana, California, in Orange County, called BES. And they try to do this kind of partnership with BES. And in talking to BES, they, are having lots of meetings, and they're learning all about BES and who supplies their hardware, where they buy all of their parts, how they build their systems, learned everything. And then, as they did with Ericsson in Stockholm and as they did with Nortel in Ottawa, Canada, learned everything and stole it. And then on top of all that, and while they were having that meetings, according to this Wall Street Journal article, we're asking them if it would be possible to build in a back door so that Huawei could, or the CCP would have access to all of this data for that they're now going to sell to Pakistan's police forces. And so now this company is saying not only, Huawei took our technology and ran with it after they learned who our vendors are and learned how to build the stuff themselves, and they built in a back door, and they have a back door into Pakistan's police departments. And that's the article. Now, what's interesting about this is that's an incredibly strong, kind of point against Huawei. If they investigate this and it turns out to be true, and it is investigatable, you can go, the intelligence community can go verify these claims quite easily. So if it turns out to be true, the timing of this is really interesting because Canada is deciding if they should extradite Huawei's CFO to America, because America wants Huawei CFO because Huawei is, being accused of lying about their involvement in Iran, which is literally next door to Pakistan. Well, there's Afghanistan in between Pakistan and Iran, but America doesn't allow doing business with companies who do business with Iran, and Huawei was not very honest about their dealings with Iran. And by the way, we have to assume they also have backdoors in their solutions that they're selling to Iran as well. And by the way, everywhere where they're selling their 5G systems, which they copied from Ericsson in Stockholm, by the way, they built their office literally next door to Ericsson's HQ in the outskirts of Stockholm, in a very peculiar that you would choose literally the building next door to your main competitor and go through the trouble of literally getting the building next door. Literally, very, very literally. No building in between them. So very peculiar coincidence indeed. And this is why America is telling all of its allies, do not use Huawei's 5G, because it has a backdoor to China, and they will use it to do surveillance on everything. So the timing of this is really interesting. This startup called BES out of Santa Ana saying that Huawei's doing this really, really bad behavior. And by the way, Pakistan, you should probably know that they're doing this to you. That's also really wild timing, because in Pakistan, where China's building a hydroelectric dam up near the Himalayas in the Khyber Pass, the locals there are now attacking the Chinese engineers. There was a bus explosion that knocked a bus into the bottom of the ravine where the dam is, and it killed 8 or 9 of the Chinese civil engineers who were building that hydroelectric dam. And then a few days later, this is all in the past few weeks, down at the major port where Pakistan meets the edge of the Persian Gulf, there was also assassination attempts on Chinese engineers in the back of a taxi. So this just adds fuel to that fire as well. This gets really weird. The timing of this revelation coming out from the Wall Street Journal of this American tech company making these claims against Huawei, doing espionage on Pakistan's government, basically, and that it stole the intellectual property and just bad behavior, and all of the above, in the context of Canada deciding, right, like literally today, Canada's deciding if they're going to hand over. There's a court case where they're deciding if they're going to hand over the Huawei CFO to America to go on trial in America, which of course they're going to do. But this certainly puts a little more political fuel on the fire to highlight the bad behavior of Huawei, as America's been wanting to get her on trial for. Anyways, where it gets additionally interesting is there was also headlines in the past over the weekend or on Friday-ish that China is now holding 2 Canadian citizens in jail, and one of them, they had this emergency trial to accuse one of them of espionage, kind of ironically, and so now that person's going to spend the rest of their life in jail in China, and that's a Canadian citizen. And what is the coincidences that China's magically whipping up these trials right as Canada's about to holding a trial to decide the fate of Huawei CFO. So it's a really
Tyler,
Vinay,
one
go
of
ahead.
them has a death sentence. One of them has a death sentence. Don't forget.
The Canadian, yes.
Yeah, one of the Canadians.
And
So this is almost like a spy swap they used to do in the Cold War.
yeah,
They'll say, "Give it back our CFO. We'll give you back your 2 citizens." Right?
yep. Oh, and that's
She's not just a CFO, she's the daughter of the chairman of Huawei.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
And then Heyman, who's Canadian, has his hand up, and Pharrell, who just joined on stage, is also from Canada. So I'm wondering if you had some related input on that.
Taylor, on the original story, just wanted to say that the Pakistani chief operating officer of that project has completely denied that Huawei. There is no evidence against
Oh, well,
Huawei
there
as
we
of now.
go.
We are
Well,
including.
then I'm sure it's just a big misunderstanding if
No,
Pakistan
it's
says that. Sure, yeah.
They don't care actually.
Yeah. Well, they probably know. So
yeah, ISI has been involved with the stuff for a long time. Sorry, ISI is the
ISI,
Pakistani intelligence
well,
services.
not only is it Pakistan's intelligence service, it runs the country. Pakistan's one of the rare countries that is run by its intelligence agency. So it's and that's a fun story in and of itself. But Pharrell, you did. Was there something you wanted to add? You had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it actually got addressed that the one Canadian is facing a death sentence, and obviously, well, we don't know necessarily all the details whether or not espionage truly was going on, but it is becoming more and more a pressure thing for Canadians in China. I've got colleagues that are working in Beijing and other places that they feel like they are under a lot more scrutiny than before, and some of them are preparing to leave.
So the gentleman who's now being held on the espionage charges, or now been convicted of espionage charges, we should say, I sent out a video when we talked about this. I don't know, 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, and it's an hour-long video of him in China, working as a cultural ambassador to the little town that he lives in, and he's been there for a decade or so, and he's trying to promote, the alcohol companies that are based there that have come up with a regional, very unique alcohol that they're starting to export, and he's welcoming these documentarians who are checking out the area, and he just functioned as an incredibly good cultural ambassador to that province that he happens to live in and love, and it was abundantly visible to anybody who watches that video, and so much so that those documentarians who visited him there were so thankful and so appreciative, and were so impressed with his genuine affection for that province that he lives in as an ambassador, kind of a cultural ambassador, that they felt it necessary to come out with a new video saying there's no way this guy is a spy against this community that he lives in, or in any playing a significant. He's in a very remote part of China, by the way, so that would be a very peculiar place to be based, to be doing espionage in kind of northeastern China, where he is. This is not where someone doing espionage would be based, and just does not have the pedigree or makeup or DNA or smell of somebody doing intelligence collecting. So they felt it necessary to come out and speak on his behalf, and highlight the videos that they made with him, and said, you judge for yourself if you think this guy is, has any kind of possibility or potential of being a spy. So I'll try and find that video again and retweet it for those, so you can kind of start to make your own sort of soft decision as to whether you think this person is in fact a spy. So
even the guy who was put to death sentence, he was initially convicted of 15 years in jail only, until the end of 2019 that they actually kind of upgraded it to a death sentence. And yeah,
great point. They've held him now for a very long time, and
yep.
what do you know? What an amazing coincidence that they all of a sudden, slam together a trial and a guilty verdict right as literally as they're as Canada's deciding the fate of Huawei's CFO.
The
Amazing
difference in the
coincidence.
court systems too is also amazing because Madame Wang is basically living in her own home with her kids, who kids and husband actually live in Canada, and they study in Canadian schools and so forth. So that's the hypocrisy of the whole thing. So she's living there. She wanted to do a PhD in Canada while she was in house arrest. She's enjoying all the freedoms of the Western court systems, yet these guys have not even had any counselor access. Only until recently did they have all that access. But even that is very minimal. So it tells you also that, yes, it's they're being charged with allegedly charged with some egregious act, but there's no representation or anything. And one thing, I don't know whether you guys covered the Afghanistan story in relation to this, not in relation to the Huawei Madame Wang, but I'm wondering also in relation to China advancing into Afghanistan.
Oh yeah. Well,
technically, they've already said that they'll back the. Well, they haven't officially said it, but they've actually said that they'll back the Taliban once they come into Kabul.
Right. Well, they're recognizing them as the new leadership of Afghanistan. Yeah, and they have quite a bit of influence in Pakistan, and now by doing so, they could have significant influence in Afghanistan if in kind of partnering with the Taliban. And some people are arguing that it's because they want some of that juicy rare earth metals that Afghanistan's known for having. So, we'll see how that all plays out. The next big headline at the moment is from Vice. It says research shows pro-Trump social network Getter, GETTR, has no content moderation besides users reporting, and has reached 1.5 million users in August. And I guess Getter had claimed they reached 1.5 million in July, but the data shows that they just reached 1.5 million users in August. And this is the pro-Trump Twitter alternative launched last month by close Trump advisor Jason Miller from Santa Monica, California, and is allowing users to share child exploitation images because there's no moderation. And so that's interesting in and of itself. And that adds in a whole interesting new twist to the whole the conversations we've been having here about how all the social media platforms are now starting to proactively address child issues of on their apps, and then Getter is notably not doing anything like that, and that adds a whole new extra little plot twist. Actually, that's kind of weird. So but indeed, they're not really doing any kind of moderation of any kind is essentially the headline, but that's by design, because the reason they built the app is because the pro-Trump audience felt like they were being inappropriately silenced on traditional, large social media apps, and they needed their own alternative, which ironically is hosted in Russia. But indeed, yeah, they're not being silenced because there's no moderation happening. And by the way, it was reported that the Taliban is itself is showing a lot of very troubling videos that are inside of Getter app, and because that's one thing that the Taliban and the Trump audience have in common is that they don't like being silenced on social media, and so they're able to share their beheading videos and whatnot on this pro-Trump app called Getter. It's also been a headline kind of related on that point, was that the Taliban has now banned vaccines in Afghanistan, as they're now taking over in Afghanistan. And one of their first kind of new rules is banning vaccinations for COVID, which again is another interesting similarity point between the pro-Trump Trump supporters and the Taliban. So maybe they have a lot to share on that point about being anti-vaxxers in their app there, because that's one of the kind of narratives that's not allowed on traditional social media. And now the two camps with similar positions about being opposed to vaccines can share those views on that app. So certainly gives a space for people with those narratives to share their views. So that's the headline from Vice on Getter. The next big one is from VentureBeat, that Seismic, which offers automated tools to help with sales and marketing, raises $170 million. No big deal. Next one's from the New York Times that says, for some teenagers, making NFTs and other forms of digital art is seen as a gateway to a career as a full-time artist and has become their new summer job. Forget mowing lawns and bagging groceries. Some Gen Z kids are finding other ways to make money this summer through NFTs. That's the headline from the New York Times. So I think no doubt what they're going to draw the connection to is the creator of what is it, Hungry Hippos, or what's the latest NFT that was made by a 12-year-old recently that people got very excited about? I know
Is it the long neck? The long neck.
Long neck, what, cats?
Something. Yeah.
Some kitty, yeah, crazy cats or some one of these new NFT auctions was essentially made by a 12-year-old. I think there's now been two. Another one was by a 16-year-old. And what I'm starting to wonder, yes,
yeah, Weird Whales.
Yes, Weird Whales, I think, was one of them.
That's the 12-year-old, yeah.
And what I'm starting to wonder is this potentially savvy parents marketing, using, maybe collaborating with their kids and making this? But
you mean child label?
No, that isn't my point at all. I mean just clever marketing.
Just joking.
Because now you have a story which is picked up by the New York Times, no less, to prove my point, which is the how to get attention around one of these NFT auctions. You need a kind of a very unique angle that'll get people excited to pay $1,000 for a gif of a whale. So one way to do that is to highlight, this is made by a 12-year-old, and it's kind of a digital lemonade stand, although $1,000 for a glass of lemonade, essentially. Alexandra?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a couple of things. One is that remember that before the pandemic, and then it was worse than the pandemic. Jobs for the 14 to 20-year-old group were non-existent because they were like everything was getting pushed down the chain. So you had like the graduate college and graduate school graduates who were working at Starbucks, which pushed down the people who were there, who ended up getting into the summer jobs and the typical teen jobs, so they just weren't available anymore. So it might be one way, honestly, that the people who used their child uh, income during those months, right? Like that's actual income for the family. That might be just another way that they're trying to supplement it because there really is no alternative. So I think that that might be one thing of it. And the other thing is that most of these are priced at like, point oh 0.02 or or even less, right? ETH. So most of them are like, $100 to $200 at most,
Hmm.
which is really stupid because honestly, a lot of people are losing 75 cents, 50 to 75 cents because of gas per transfer if they're using Ethereum.
Hmm.
But that's so. I mean, most of them are not like $1,000 things. They're very cheap ones, but they don't have the campaign around them like the Bored Apes did. Where they gave away a bunch and then started to build a marketplace from there. So I think it's probably more than parents trying to make money from their kids, but that's probably part of it. Honestly, there's probably some parents that are doing that, but a lot of them are just trying to supplement income. They can't do it any other way.
I don't.
Can I?
I don't. I want to
Gab,
recontextualize it. I'll turn it to you in a second, Gabby. I just wanted to point out. I don't. I wouldn't frame it in the context of making money from their kids. I think it's more like, hey, Bobby or Sarah knows how to do a little coding. Let's do that. Let's jump on this hype train together because here's a way for it. And I imagine they're even putting in the money into the kid's bank account at the end of the day. Um, and I
And look
think
at the
it's
demographics, though,
I
right?
think it's a huge.
Sorry, look at the demographics.
I would do it myself. I think this is if your kid can learn something in the process and learn about business and learn about NFTs. I don't think it's purely 100% scam. I think it's geek parents with their kind of geeky kids do but I think the parents are involved to some degree is what my suspicion, and I really shouldn't do that without any kind of evidence because I really love the idea that a 12-year-old is making an NFT. It's just a little bit of a stretch. Yeah.
So what I was going to say is what I learned during the pandemic is a number of parents started using their kids' names and kids' accounts to set up cryptocurrency accounts in their kids' name because that was the only way that they can continue to look on paper lower socioeconomic status and continue to get in unemployment and all those other things that you could get from the federal government. So there is, and I know this from facts, not from what I read off the news. And so while I watch the regulation on cryptocurrency and how they tax it, there are a number of people from the lower socioeconomic status and people who work in banks who have personally went and created cryptocurrency accounts with other names, more than likely their kids, and they've been holding the money, Dogecoin, Bitcoin, whatever. And I've seen this because I know it, and they do the same thing with NFTs. And so Tyler is somewhat accurate.
Yeah, could be.
Uh,
I mean, I would love to be to be honest. I would love to be proven wrong on my little conspiracy theory here, because I would love the idea of a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, or even 16-year-old doing this independently. That I would absolutely enthusiastically applaud it. So
But
uh,
according to what Gabby mentioned just now, there will be a risk, right? What if there's really a situation of tax invasion and then their kids will be, blacklisted since young?
so most of those accounts, you can't open an account until you are usually 21. Some of them have gone down to
Right.
18,
Uh-huh.
but you're not actually. So if they're opening the account, if a child is opening the account, and usually you have to prove that there's KYC AML on most of these, especially in the US, and for them to access it, there's more fraud in that, in opening an account for someone who is underage. But also the way that they do KYC AML, it's literally like you hold your passport and you have to take a picture with your face. Like it's, it's the there's more stuff, and then the account has to be linked to the person that's holding it, and then they have to look at the history of the account. So there's an actual process that actually does happen. So it would be like the end of ongoing fraud to be able to use a kid's account and be able to open up a crypto account on an exchange in order to do this transaction. Now, if they're trying to get non KYC'd Bitcoin or something like that, which actually isn't that easy, you have to know people and know where to get it and know how to access a DEX or whatever. But then there would be no need to use your kid because you're trying to just stay out of the system altogether. So it's not entirely clear that how that would really work on any systematic basis. But the tax evasion stuff is primarily because in 2017 and at the end of 2017, only 50 people declared that they had had any gains on their crypto, and clearly it was way more than 50. And the IRS was like, we read the news too, we know what's happening. So that's how they started getting into all the exchanges. They've actually led all of the federal issues that are as the investigative agencies have come in from DOJ, from the SEC, CFTC, all of those people. It started with the IRS going into the exchanges, and now there's such a crackdown happening on the exchanges that it's the same people who are evading taxes as were before. Generally speaking, not the lower income people who form actually the bulk of the crypto investors post 2019. It's actually more the people at the very top who are using jurisdictional hopping to try and evade taxes. And that's a big issue that the IRS may or may not have the stomach to pursue, because obviously those are also big campaign donors, et cetera.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I do know that it's complicated, but this is in line with the PPP loans that were given out. I mean, when I read the headlines and I see who gets caught for them, it's the people that have millions, right? But I know people on the floor that have used their 18 and 17-year-old kid to get a $10,000. The $10,000 ones that spread across the lower socioeconomic neighborhoods in the U.S. And even the penitentiary. There are people in jail that figured out how to get PPP loans, and they put them into, I forget that electronic bank. It was Swift, Swipe, something like that. In those, and they sold all this on the black market. So you're right when you say the monetary amount and the tax evasion is probably greater with the wealthy, but it is going on nonstop, and it goes on nonstop in the cities that have the most amount of fraud. Because, and I'm only saying this because it is true, and it goes under the radar, but it doesn't mean that it does not happen, because it is happening. And so what I've learned, being on some of the newer cryptocurrency startups like BitClout, like in Canada, their tax laws are different from America's. And so although a lot of these websites that are made in America say like you need to be certain age, Canadian kids have made hundreds of thousands of USDA under their parents' watch, allegedly, on these cryptocurrency NFTs and things of that nature.
Hey, Gabby, it was the Swift system. You're correct on that. So it's huge programs like that ripe for fraud.
Eugene, you had your hand up. Was it you wanted to comment on this point?
Yeah, just quick update. I know crypto gets a bad rap sometimes from some of the assumptions, but anybody can open a crypto wallet. There's no restrictions on age. Anywhere in the world, you can download thousands of apps and hold as much currency as you want. That's the whole premise of decentralized. At the same time, uh, if you're unable to establish a gateway for you to take your crypto into a regular currency, fiat, uh, then you won't be able to withdraw it. And all things considered, even today under accounting practices, under GAAP, crypto is non-tangible asset. And find it extremely hard to believe that in Canada or US, if you're under 18 years old, you can establish a way to convert your Bitcoin to even an ATM machine at the gas station, the Bitcoin ATM machine, because you're required to have a social security, a valid age verification, stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways you can hold crypto. You don't have to have accounts anywhere. There are millions of billions of kids probably now who hold at least some kind of currency, cryptocurrency or token. And to say that that's holding it as a fraud, or parents are, opening up accounts under their name, it's a little bit of exaggeration. But to the point of NFTs, uh, it's starting to feel like, for those people who were in the 2017 timeframe of initial coin offerings, uh, that ultimately ended up sinking billions of dollars into non-existence. NFTs are an acceleration, and NFTs are reminding of that same period of what's the validity of those GIF files, and what assurances you get when you buy the GIF file has not been established. And that's a greater concern, because now there's $1 billion+ in NFTs that's been processed, but there's no regulation around protecting that intellectual property that exists today.
Okay.
There is actually a lot of regulation regarding intellectual property. There are three main areas of problems regarding NFTs. And then another group of problems that regards the lack of secondary market, right? So to the extent that people are flipping things, flipping is not a secondary market. That's a froth market. So we don't have a true secondary market. And in most of these, uh, it's not quite the same as an ICO, because it's not essentially an unregistered security offering. It's actually, just a purchase of it's a purchase of something for ownership that you actually, you do have, and you don't actually buy a file. What you're doing is getting ownership. It's an asset that can be hypothecated, and it can be used as collateral, and you can use it for financing. So it's an actual asset. It's like an asset-backed token. But I don't think that it's quite the same as that ICO period. And I remember that period. That was kind of a mess, but that was clear fraud. Like there were a lot of people who were selling coins with no intention of actually building the infrastructure underneath it. This is just an actual, like, an asset that people are selling. And honestly, in a lot of areas, especially under authoritarian rule, this is the way that people who have no access to capital can get access, and people can actually emigrate when they couldn't emigrate before, because they have access to a marketplace now where they can sell their goods. Usually they're artists or other people who have creative projects. But there's not really a limit to what you can put on an NFT. It doesn't have to be art or music or whatever, but these people actually have a new way to survive outside of the jurisdiction where before they were trapped.
Okay. So the next big headline is from the New York Times. Inside Twitter's 2-year effort to change its internal culture, led by controversial VP of Design Dontley Davis, who is also playing a very significant role in their Clubhouse copy called Twitter Spaces, because that involves a lot of design. And he's actually quite active on Twitter in their rooms with somebody has to remind me the name of the young lady he hired for as weird as this, having a brain fart, the team that
You talking about
Maya,
Maya
yes,
Patton?
thank you, Gabby. So Maya, obviously, who he hired to be part of that team, and is also very active there. So you can actually engage with this guy, Dontley Davis, who the New York Times is doing this big story about how 2 years ago the company brought in a blunt executive, Dontley Davis, to make things move faster, which certainly things have the amount of features and products and services has definitely gone up tremendously in the past 2 years, which coincides exactly with when Dontley Davis joined. But it says 2 years ago, the company brought in a blunt executive to make things move faster and to promote diversity. Then the problems began, the story says. And so I'm going to tweet that one out so that you can read about what the problems are that they're teasing in their clickbaity headline. Um, yeah, and some people are saying that it's a very good article and it's a good look at what's going on inside of Twitter and whatnot. And then the next story is from Bloomberg about a crypto staking service called Figment raises $50 million. And this is an interesting one, although interesting in that it's not interesting. From the Wall Street Journal, a journalist named Rachel Levy writes a story that she writes the headline that DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, moles using private companies to analyze public social media data after the intelligence community failed to identify threats that led to the January 6th violence in Washington, D.C. And that's no news. That's no headline at all. Government agencies have been using outside private companies to do data analysis on social media for a very long time, like a very long time. And so I'm not sure what.
New York Times and Bloomberg continue to get either B grades or
Yeah,
possibly C grades, Tyler, right?
this is just weird. Yeah, let me see if it's not paywall. Let me tweet it out so people can read it themselves.
On the context of the headline, I think a lot of the questions are what kind of perhaps potential role people in the government had to suppress the response. That's kind of the big question about the whole January 6th is was there a role from anybody in administration or in a couple other entities. That's kind of the question it begs.
It says the Department of Homeland Security is considering hiring private companies to analyze public social media for warning signs of extremist violence, spurring debate. There's a lot of private companies that offer these services, by the way, spurring debate within the agency over how to monitor for such threats while protecting America's civil liberties. The effort, which remains under discussion and hasn't received approval or funding, would involve sifting through large flows of internet traffic to help identify online narratives that might provide leads on developing attacks, whether from home or abroad. The initiative comes after the nation's intelligence community failed to sufficiently identify and share signs of the threat that led to the assault on the U.S. Capitol by a mob of Donald Trump supporters on January 6th. John Cohen, a top DHS official, is spearheading the project, which he describes as part of an upgrade to the department's capabilities in social media analysis, marshaling the expertise of outside companies and ramping up internal capabilities are central to that effort, he said. Yeah, but you've been Palantir's been doing this for fucking a decade. So what's new here? What we're talking about now is dramatically expanding our focus, Mr. Cohen said in an interview. Mr. Cohen's push has sparked internal debates in DHS and elsewhere in the Biden administration over longstanding tensions between civil liberties and security efforts. Some officials in the agency and the White House worry about governmental overreach and say people familiar with the deliberations and concern that civil liberty advocates share. We do not support an expansion of social media surveillance in the name of stopping the next attack on Capitol Hill, according to Adam Schwartz. Adam Schwartz, an attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit supporting digital rights, said the organization is wary of any government effort to gobble up more social media data. That information could potentially be stored forever and later mined to find leads on crimes. And yeah, but that's partly why you would delegate it to a private company. That's why they do this stuff, by the way, so that it's not.
Well, to push back on that, if we can stop for a moment, to push the whole idea of pushing back on something that's already been shared publicly is absurd. If somebody shared it publicly in social media, it's a part of the public record, and if anything, it should be documented. So there's no right to if you're blurting all this whatever out on social media, what right do you have to have that concealed later on? That's
Oh, that's
absurd.
totally true. That's funny. That's totally true. It's public. It can't actually be considered privileged at all. That's funny.
You see that? And I'm not even a lawyer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But the point is that the people who are best suited to do the job are not the government. That's not their skill set, anyways. So, yeah, you might as well.
But in a prior world, I mean, the whole cybersecurity is going to a new level, right? Where I think
with your mic just dropped.
On the pub,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm sorry, the public and private, we need to collaborate to achieve a higher order of security, which would include anything certainly that led to the January 6th uprising. So
it's an interesting point. Indeed, the private sector is going to be far better at this because the geeks and the are generally avoid government careers, and they come up with awesome technologies, and if that's the private sector, they're going to do a far better job of it. They can work for the Defense Department or the Justice Department or whoever, and they often do, that's why I'm saying this headline's kind of weird, because this stuff has been going on for many years now. But where it gets interesting is, I'll save my other point because I don't want to.
Tyler,
Yeah,
I'm
Yeah, but
also
Tyler,
wondering with the
sorry.
oh, I'm also wondering like with the Apple thing, right? With the recent Apple story, is it like Apple now being sometimes forced to sort of have the open door through this a parent saving children sort of policy? Is that how they're doing it again?
say it
Like
again.
you know how the NSA previously had open doors, right, into all these different applications and everything else. I'm wondering with Apple's recent revelation that they want to allow these image searches. Is that sort of like a way for them to get? Maybe there was some pressure for them to sort of open this up, but they're using the children's angle to do that.
That's what the many people are worried about. Let's put it that way.
And him, and kind of, if you zoom out, it's to come up with the mechanical method. It's like
Right.
if you're baking a cake, you need an oven, you need all kinds of things. And what's the best cake you can build first? It's probably the one that has the most positive impact on society, regardless of the potential for negative, right? So
Right.
they can take this to anywhere now. India wants certain persons not monitoring. They have the mechanics already built out. They just need to change the recipe.
Well, here
Yeah, on the earlier
Yeah,
point, but sorry, this is Vinay. On the earlier point about people putting stuff in public record and it becoming the most popular law is going to be the right to be forgotten. They say, I said this shit, but can I be forgiven? Can you take this down forever, please? That's going to be very popular now.
yeah,
I think in Europe, I think that if somebody can share it from Europe, I think that is part of the Europe's legal structure or
I
something.
think France passed that. Yeah, the right to be forgotten. So the
But it's also a scary thing, though, right? With Twitter having that blue membership plan, you could actually delete some aspects of your tweet, edit your tweet. So I'm wondering, is there going to be like two tiers of society where those who could pay can actually have their records expunged or edited versus others who can't, right?
So someone named the last paragraph of this article about the government working with private companies to kind of do the data analysis on social media to find potential bad actors. The very last paragraph is a quote, and it says, "There's a real temptation once the tool is in place to say, well, we have this. Why don't we use it for these other purposes?" Which speaks exactly to the Apple issue, of once you have a technology, you're naturally going to want to think of other ways to use. You made the knife to bake a cake, but there's all kinds of other good and nightmarish scenarios. So anyway, it's an interesting article. I just tweeted that one out, and then there's just a couple.
Can I just add
Yeah,
about the right to be forgotten?
sure.
Just point of clarity is that it's actually in the GDPR, the European privacy rules. It's called the right of erasure, and it's actually one of the biggest problems that is not being addressed in blockchain right now, because there are a lot of there's private and there's personal information and anonymous information as those are defined in the GDPR that's being collected, and there isn't really a way to enforce that rule, so that has to actually be put in, and most of the privacy policies are inadequate.
So the next article is about OpenAI Clip, which is a really fantastic technology, and it's the New Yorker who wrote this. It's a profile of a Twitter account called @images_AI, which I will tweet out for you. at images underscore AI, which is an account on Twitter. And the name of the account is Images Generated by AI Machines. I'm now following it, and I will tweet it. I will tweet out one of their recent. They just did. This is really wild. So they're using this technology made by OpenAI, which is a big AI lab, one of the world's best AI labs, which they have a technology called Clip. And what Clip does is you can ask it very easily, like a child would. You ask it to make images, and you can say, "Give me an image of um, a hippopotamus belly dancing, on a bed of flowers," and boom, it does it. And then say, "Great, change the hippopotamus to purple." Boom, it does it, and you can just direct it. And so what gets interesting is if you give it very interesting questions, as somebody just did a few hours ago and tweeted it, and I just retweeted it, and they said, uh, the fall of U.S. Embassy in Kabul. And they gave that as the input, and you can see the image that it made, which is this really artistic. I mean, it looks like a piece of modern art, I have to say. Tell me if I'm wrong. I just tweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW. And it looks like beautiful modern art, to be honest. And so people are giving it really interesting questions. And some of the really interesting ones that people are finding are like a Chinese temple in the stylings of Art Deco, and it shows you a Chinese temple in the stylings of Art Deco in a way that just would kind of blow your mind. Really wild stuff. This is a really amazing Twitter account. I really can't recommend it enough, and it's so impressive that the New Yorker did a profile on this Twitter account, which essentially is just using OpenAI Clip as a source for really interesting queries, like the one I just tweeted out, which itself is just stunningly beautiful, actually.
Hey,
Yeah.
Tyler, do we know if the same two people asked it the same question, does the same result happen every
No.
time?
In fact, the same person can ask for 10 different varieties of an input. So you can say, "Show me 10 examples of a neon sign of my name," and it would give you 10 totally different examples of your name in neon signs.
So can you make NFTs with that? If you have 10 NFTs,
Yeah,
you can put it out
of
there?
course you could. You can use
Yeah.
it as the input of generating something that you think is a visual value that you could then sell. And by the way,
No, but
this
only if you have the digital rights. You probably don't have the digital rights.
Oh,
you might not
darn it.
in the case of OpenAI. However, what you're referring to is actually not so dissimilar from the origins of the original CryptoPunks, which is they are AI generated. And so you could say, "Give me 10,000 versions of a figure with various, accessories like hats and sunglasses, and that's what the CryptoPunks are: is 10,000 unique variations of a figures, kind of portraits, and the machine made all 10,000 of them. They were not individually human created, and that's perceived as what is so interesting about them. Yeah,
Tyler, if we could put a pin on it,
yeah.
part of the thing about AI with the rise of AI most recently has been the idea that, oh man, computers can't be creative. What's going on? The fact, the fact is that what everyone is hearing right now is the graphic design community, kind of a very vibrant realm of human creativity is on notice with regards to using a machine to create logos and design and things like that. So just let's be really aware that yet another industry is in the kind of going to be basically swallowed up. And and Alexander, if you could clarify, it'd be helpful, I think, for the audience and myself. So if you went to OpenAI to say, "Hey, build me a whatever," it to be used as a marketing asset. Typically, you would have those rights assigned as a copyright. But if you're going to just to OpenAI or what have you, one of these little AI little creative services, what how can people use that, or how can they not use it? Like, what are the implications?
So that would actually depend on what the terms of that site were, right? And then what rights they're offering users. So typically, when you have something that is computer generated, what you're actually getting is a limited license, and it usually has some commercial aspect to it. But there may be an outright sale where you own the underlying IP, including the digital rights. The limited license is basically you just get a license to use that image, but the whoever owns the site owns the images underlying it, so they can use them again and again in other different like permutations or things like that. So that's, I mean, and that's kind of what happens when you get like you use like one of those auto generated logo things. Is you basically have um, a license to use that image for yourself, but you don't have any rights to the underlying whatever it is that's creating the images, that because those base images are owned by them, so you can't go back and say that you own those images, therefore you have a right to that. So, and it's a non-exclusive license, so your logo may be generated in someone else's company and you don't have the right to say, no, wait, that's my logo. You have to go, you can try and go and trademark it, but there may be issues with trying to trademark something that is broadly held, right? If because there would already be market confusion. So it's based on at its heart is based on what is being offered by that company. And I don't think it's probably as broad as most people generally think it is. And mere ownership of something, like if you own something physically, like you have a painting or something physically, that doesn't entitle you to the right to digital rights to it, right? The underlying IP is still usually held by the creator. So if you try to make, like, if you have a painting and you try to make an NFT of your painting, that, like you have the Mona Lisa, lucky you, and you decide that you want to make an NFT of that painting by taking a digital image or and then selling it, you can't necessarily do that because you may not hold the digital rights to it. So there's a separation between what rights you might have, and it's within that particular site.
And Alexandra,
Not
have
legal
you looked at the
advice.
meta? Oh, sorry. Have you
Or
looked
just
at the
not.
metadata? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alexandra.
Ladies first.
Yeah. No, I know that.
Oh, I'm just trying to say it's not legal advice. None of this is legal advice.
And Alexander, have you ever looked at the metadata of any of these AI created, or has anyone looked at the metadata of any of these AI created images? I'm just curious to know what they put in there.
It really depends on what the, like, on the individual application or whatever. A lot of it gets stripped out, honestly. That metadata gets stripped out. That's why it's important to make sure that you've got very clear terms, which, by the way, are not a contract. That's basically just goes to notice, but you have to notify people on what rights they're getting. But assuming that you're asking about what rights are in the metadata itself, a lot of that actually gets stripped out. So hopefully it's in more places than just the metadata, unfortunately.
Okay. So then we've gone through the popular headlines of the moment, and that brings us to the part of the program everyone's been waiting for, which is all of the very fun, more interesting, more, I would say, even important articles that everyone on stage and in the audience has been sharing with us via Twitter, which anyone can do by finding any article that they think we should discuss and just include our Twitter handle, which is simply the first letters of Tech News Around the World, TNATW, as part of the tweet. We will get notified. It often takes us several hours to catch up because there's a whole lot of people tweeting tweets, very great articles, and I've now cherry picked out my favorite, I don't know, 50 or 60 out of the past 8 hours. And here we go. So one of them is this one. Vinay, you just sent in this one about China's recent rape scandal. Was that yours? Who sent that in just now? Was that Vinay? It was. So Vinay, you just sent in one just now about from CNN. China's recent rape scandals are a hashtag Me Too victory. Activists say even if the government won't admit it.
Yeah, so this is, I don't know how many of you are familiar. A couple of weeks ago, Alibaba had a big sexual harassment case, and they formed, I tweeted another one to you. Tyler, as well. Alibaba has formed a all-women sexual harassment committee. And part of this whole population thing is they want to ease the stress on women of being harassed and all of that stuff. So they're trying not to say that there is a Me Too movement, but the Chinese government's cracking down on companies and any cases of sexual harassment in a very, very strong way.
So the head,
And there were
But
2
sexual
cases of rape now.
harassment can go both ways too, right? Why is it just all women?
yeah, because
Well,
Asian women,
It goes both
But the
ways.
harassment
yes,
is about
I am
power,
so
though,
scared when I
Cheryl.
travel in
So
Asia.
it can go both ways, but usually it doesn't because it's about power as well as the unwanted advancement. It's not just the unwanted advancements.
So the article says the 2 explosive rape allegations have rocked China in recent weeks, turning a spotlight on the country's stifled Me Too movement and problems of sexual assault. On Monday, the e-commerce giant Alibaba said it had fired an employee who was accused of sexual assaulting another employee during a business trip. The week before, Beijing police said they had arrested Chinese-Canadian pop star Chris Wu on suspicion of rape, according to a statement. In both cases, victims had posted their allegations on Chinese social media, which sparked an online furor and prompted police to investigate. Neither Wu nor the Alibaba employee have been charged with any crime. The authorities' swift actions won praise from some online who pointed to the 2 cases as an indication of the effective rule of law and criminal justice in China. Yet it raised eyebrows amongst others who say it instead highlights how rare it is for survivors to speak out and seek justice. Here's the quote: "It is unsurprising that both cases have drawn such wide attention, given the celebrity Chris Wu and Alibaba's high profiles," said Feng Yuan, a feminist scholar and activist. But this also serves as a reminder that for many other cases of sexual harassment and assault, if the accusers are not so famous or influential, the victims may not have their voices heard at all. So
That's the key.
There's just an article that the Beijing authorities has just approved the arrest of Canadian Chris Wu.
So they are arresting him.
Yeah.
Okay. And
And this is
interestingly,
the thing, they did this, I mean, this is the thing, right? So they're actually not, it's all symbolics, anything. I think the key thing is on the ground, like how are the real people who are day-to-day workers being impacted? How are they being helped? I mean, for the cultural thing, it's actually good. If it trends on Weibo and, I mean, sorry, on sorry, I've got the mediums there. But the thing is, if it trends on their social media, I think maybe people will get more smart about it and it'll improve things. That's good for them. But it's just basically using all these other people as figurehead. I mean, sort of the token prosecutions. Yeah.
okay. So the next article that somebody found is this one about Singapore seeks correction on COVID-19 child death Facebook post. Do you know about this one, Cheryl?
Is it POFMA?
This one's from Faraz via Bloomberg, and it says Singapore's Ministry of Health has issued an order to Facebook requiring correction to be made over what it says are falsehoods circulating online about child deaths of COVID.
Yep. That's under the POFMA thing. The Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act.
Oh.
POFMA, I call it.
Okay.
It's very common in Singapore.
Okay. So it says Singapore's Ministry of Health has issued an order on Facebook. As of August 14th, there has been no case of any child that has died of COVID-19 in Singapore, according to a statement from the Ministry of Health. But there was a Facebook post that implied that there had about a 3-year-old child that had died. And so Singapore saying, remove that falsehood or get out of our country, something like that.
Oh, no, they are not asking Facebook to get out of the country. They are just asking them to make this a falsehood. That means to label it as a falsehood.
Oh, label it as a falsehood. Okay.
Yes. You can still leave it there, but it has to label it as falsehood.
Okay. So Dan, here comes your chance to get into some green tech. The first headline is from Faraz: cost to bury carbon near tipping point as emission prices soar, is the headline from Bloomberg. And it says skyrocketing carbon prices and a code red warning about the threat posed by climate change are giving fresh momentum to a technology that captures and draws down carbon from the atmosphere.
Yep, that's a hugely getting really controversial. Lots of discussion just in the last week, a lot on Twitter about is it a savior or is it something that's horrible? I mean, like there's a group of climate activists and even climate scientists, some of them, who say it's an excuse of the fossil fuel industry just to keep doing things as usual. That's on one side, and then on the other side, it's well, we don't make it without it. There's just no way we're going to address the problem without it. And I'm in that camp. It was originally, by the way, to be fair to all of those other folks, originally was greenwashing by the coal industry. You might remember clean coal, and it was an excuse to keep doing things as usual in electricity production. But now coal power electricity is more expensive than renewables without carbon capture. So adding carbon capture just makes it more expensive. So it doesn't make any sense at all to do it for electricity production. But cement, for just one example of industrial emissions, is 8% of all emissions. It's just from cement, and half of that is actually not from fossil fuels. It's from the chemical reaction of the cement when you make it. So I think that CCS is needed for the 10 gigatons a year, about 25% of emissions that are very hard to replace with renewables right now. Not that it can't be done, but it's going to take decades, and we don't have decades to wait. A lot of people think that the technology doesn't really exist and all that kind of stuff, but they're confusing the fact that up until very recently, and what the article is talking about, there were absolutely no incentives to build this stuff because no one would pay you to save the world. No one would pay you to remove carbon, so why would anyone do it? It would just be a cost without, quote, a benefit, except for the benefit of not killing everybody eventually, but so there's now starting to be incentives. Technology is starting to be rolled out. I have an investment in a company in this area that's kind of a leader in the space called Svante. And in addition to the carbon capture, which you capture from the plant itself, which is in concentrated form, so the CO2 coming out of the smokestack is, maybe 10 or 20%. In the atmosphere, CO2 is only 0.04%. So getting it out of the air is harder. That's called direct air capture. And that is also something we're going to need because CO2 is already too high. Again, both can be done. It's not easy. It's not cheap. But it's a lot cheaper than not doing it and suffering the consequences of it. So I actually tweeted out to Tech News last night or 7 hours ago, whatever it was, just a chart of energy usage by type. How much is fossil fuels, how much is renewables. And when you look at that, you realize what a daunting challenge we have to replace all fossil fuels with renewables. I mean, I think we can and we better do it, but it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen as fast as we think, and therefore we better have plan B, and carbon capture is plan B. Anyone's really interested in this, next Monday, August 23rd, a week from today, interviewing Klaus Lackner, who is the godfather of carbon capture. And he's a really cool guy, very smart, been working on this for decades, and we're going to talk all about the subject of air capture. So anyway, that's
okay. Thank you.
That's my overview.
Sure. Alrighty. The next article up is people are getting excited about the next iPhone, as Apple any day now, probably tomorrow or the next day, will announce the actual day in September when they will reveal the new upcoming iPhone, which will either be September 7th or 14th, and we will know the answer to that probably in the next 48 hours, as journalists will get their invites to join that event, probably almost certainly virtually. And but that means we get to watch it right along with them on a live stream, as we've done previously, which is a lot of fun. But there's not much of a hint, is the article I will tweet out now for you. Essentially, it's going to have the identical sizes as previous phones of the iPhone 12 lineup. It's expected to be identical in terms of the sizes of the devices. and except with the notch at the top of the screen will be 30% smaller, and it will have 120 hertz refresh rate on the display, which means that like your the film rate, or this the speed of the update of the speed of the refresh of the screen is faster, which gives it a nicer feel. And with some minor camera improvements, and obviously the chip is upgraded every year in every phone, and this will have a better 5G chip, and that's basically it. So no, it's not going to have USB-C.
Also a better Wi-Fi chip, and also a bigger
Yes,
battery.
yes, the battery's about as every new phone they've ever had. It has a slightly bigger battery, and it does Wi-Fi 6, as every other phone manufacturer's been doing for a while now. So iPhone's catching up
It's
to
supposed to be 6E, by the way.
yeah,
6E. There's an
fantastic.
extended part of it. Yeah.
iPhone's catching up to all the cheap Chinese phones that are half the price. So it's great news for all the iPhone users out there.
And a much better camera, likely with telescopic photos, like a lot of the Asian
Yeah.
manufactured stuff.
So
Does anybody actually get the phones that like right when they come out? I'm sorry, just curious. Does anybody actually do that?
a lot of people do.
Maybe Michael.
Yeah, I'm sure Michael
I
does.
usually do.
I usually
I
do.
always do.
I
And
get it,
what?
but every few years. I mean, not when I decide to get it, I try to get it right away.
Yeah.
That's
I
wastage, isn't it? Your phone is still working and then you buy a new one just because a new one come out?
Yeah,
yeah
and then you give the other one to your family.
Yep.
That's
I
that will hurt the climate.
But this is
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
like,
So as an advocate for Mama Gaia, I'm with Cheryl. I try to like not upgrade every time, just for the obvious reasons as we're identifying, and I'll just re-advocate the fact that I've got like 2 or 3 2012 laptops that I still use because it's all you really need to do most of what you need to do.
but this is your if you really want the capital G geek accreditation, you must get the phone right when it comes out each year and pass your previous phone down to whoever's next in line in your family to receive it.
But Tyler, unless you're like the top TikTok maker in the world, and I've not seen any of your TikTok videos yet, Tyler.
I'm not on
I don't know
TikTok.
whether
Yeah.
you need those. Oh, you're not? Okay. I thought you had an alias or something, like down from Thailand or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like in terms of like you don't need the latest technology out there. And one question is with this whole semiconductor shortage and all these supply chain issues, shouldn't Apple be sort of putting a pause on their release?
Mm,
There's no advantage to their phone at this point. So I'm wondering, like,
Oh,
why
but
not
it's such
pause
a
it?
huge. It's like 50% of their revenue. So
Ah,
it's
yes, that's true.
huge. It's huge. It's huge. Yeah. So for them, and nobody's getting those protection plans, apparently. So they can't get money from that. But I always wonder, like, if when people get the newest stuff, and I do know that capital N nerd or whatever the term was that Tyler used. I know that that's actually a draw, but I remember that Samsung, was it the Galaxy or whatever, that started causing fires in your pocket. Remember that one? I was completely turned
No,
off of like getting the newest
on
after that.
airplanes, on airplanes, yeah.
I
Sorry,
just
guys. I have a question. Tyler, did you say you're not on
correct.
TikTok? How are you getting all your twerking videos out?
Yeah.
I just if I may, the IPCC report that came out and the pivot we all need to collectively cultivate would suggest that we just examine the person in the mirror. I'm just saying. I'm just saying to just be thoughtful about that. But I'm familiar with the geek. The geek. I'm totally. Oh shit! There's so many reasons to consume like that. But I just want to. If you believe that 2021 is a year that we need to take a big breath and collectively start to move in a different direction, just wanted to advocate again for Mama Gaia.
Yeah.
And I certainly advocate for that, but just take a step back and think 20 years ago about all the gadgets that we had that are replaced by your phone, including all the music stuff, all the photography stuff, clocks. I mean, on and on. I've never seen it, but it'd be interesting to look at a study that says, is it net positive or obviously making anything,
I mean,
I
Apple does a
haven't.
good
especially
I
job
buying,
of
haven't. I haven't
recycling.
bought. I'm a geek, and I bought the digital camera since the first, Sony. I don't know what they called it. You had to put a floppy in it, and I have not bought a digital camera since my iPhone 4. And that. So I think the thing is some people are buying a new phone every year. Some people are buying a new camera, at instead of, some are focused on the camera, some are focused on the device, some are focused on apps, some are focused on some new killer feature. But I think if you look at the impact of not buying all those digital cameras, there's a cost there too. And then lastly, I come from that ecosystem of Apple MFI manufacturing. They have a very stringent supplier code of conduct. So when you do buy Apple products, at least the products you're buying conform to that code of conduct, meaning, no rare, no conflict minerals, no child labor, etc. So uh,
Those are
I'm just
guidelines for the
justifying.
front end people, right? So it's not for
No,
the
that's the
sourcing. Yeah,
entire. That's the entire supply
entire
chain.
chain,
Yeah,
entire.
no, like
Okay.
as part
but
of the supply
but
chain, we should be audited on a 24-hour notice and
if
present everything.
if consumer don't create the demand, I'm sure Apple and the other companies like that will not want to roll out their new phones every 1 or 2 years. So I think it's still back down to consumers. We have to control our habits. We should not over consume.
So
But it's also
that's
Apple doing all the advertising too. And to Shell's point too, it's also Apple does this whole FOMO advertising, right? It's like, oh my God, this is like you got this one new thing. You could actually change one thing in your phone. This which you can't do it on any other phone. And
the. I'm
yeah,
sorry, Heyman. Sorry.
no, go ahead, David.
No, just the right framing is we need to be thoughtful about our compute infrastructure starting this year moving forward. We just need to. Period. Full stop. So it's not just the devices, and it's a forward-looking really question, Dan. There's an app for that, and the way that the smartphone has literally replaced so many devices is valuable to this point. But there's billions and billions of phones. But the point is, we all need to be thoughtful about the footprint and what drives our consumption. That culture, that's destructive. So we just all need to find our way to pivot and as we move forward together.
However,
Actually, David, that's a good question
but
though. I mean, sorry,
but
Tyler.
VR
Oh,
will VR reduce flights or travel?
It has to.
Right.
It
Well,
has
my
to
point so
because of
then
how.
shouldn't you become the biggest? Shouldn't the green folks become the biggest ambassadors of VR as a suitable replacement or alternative to traveling either by car or by airplane?
Absolutely. In that context, I'm a big advocate for working from home if you can. I mean, this whole idea of the big techs trying to say everybody got to get back in the office is just absurd on the face. We need to find ways in the short term to build means to be productive in a hybrid situation. But if you can be productive, work from home, we need to just work together to start to pivot our culture. But absolutely, I think that that whole business travel space, the tourism. I grew up in Las Vegas, so I understand the pain, but this VR stuff is pretty freaking cool. And you've talked about the hybrid events that are being cultivated now, and it puts wind in the sail that we're going to hopefully be able to pivot and start to write a new chapter of how we're living and working.
I agree.
Okay, so then a couple headlines are just now as America's waking up on the West Coast. They start doing tweeting activity right about now, and so there's a couple of new articles that are getting a lot of attention at the moment. One is about the Android 12 operating system, which just like iOS 15 that's coming out, Android 12 is about to come out. And so there's a new function in Android 12 called camera stitches, which is an accessibility feature that lets users control their Android devices using only facial movements, which is essentially designed for people who might be paralyzed from the waist down. However, interesting to see if there will be interesting use cases that might come out of that while you're at work on your laptop and you have your phone next to you and you can essentially control it without leaving your keyboard or your mouse. or even using your voice. And then another interesting one is Norway has another unicorn. Holy cow! I think that might be their second or their third tech startup unicorn called Gelato, and it's a marketplace for printing services from everything from mugs to clothing. Raises 240 million at a 1 billion valuation. So congrats to my Norwegian friends. And where is Ellen, by the way, Heyman? Busy working on her
Ellen?
P.
Halfie?
Yes.
Halfley? No, she's actually apparently she's finished her vacation. She will be joining us soon, I think.
Well,
That's what I
this
heard.
is a fair point, because the Scandinavians are on their very cherished 6-week summer holiday, as they do every year.
6
Yes,
weeks.
they all
Wow.
get 6 weeks. So, and it's
By the way, like we just finished our conversation about green and sustainability, and what do we say about like these printing items in the physical world and then sort of shipping when it should be like somewhat local? Like could we have like local places where we just go to a printing shop and say, okay, we ordered it, go to this local place and pick it up,
There's
sort
a
of thing?
bunch of startups in that space, Heyman, that are promoting local, printing of distributed manufacturing, basically, like very localized and things like that. If I might be able to just add one little pin on the latest iOS version, what we're used to doing as well is getting new features, which are awesome and empowering and helpful for what we do. There's also a need for Apple and those companies to also maintain support for older devices. There are ways for them, first of all, to just accept that as a standard, which would help with the sustainability, but also to maintain at least a minimal configuration of like apps that an older phone can support. It's so in any case, there's a whole business practice that quite frankly needs to get nudged pretty significantly.
So on the working front, one of the headlines from Nikkei Asia right now is that and this is Japan's kind of best publication, Nikkei, saying that Japanese are working less and less. Survey finds hours on the job fall faster than any other major economy in the world. Office workers to stay on the job time spent on the job in Japan has fallen by nearly 3 40-hour work weeks since 2018. Official data shows as government efforts to rein in unhealthy amounts of overtime kicked in, and the changes forced by the pandemic further accelerated the trend. But I think it's more of a generational trend, because I've been watching this for decades as all my friends are aging and are now in their 40s, and we've been friends since we were late teenagers. And the culture is shifting away from the traditional quote unquote salaryman model into much more gig style work, gig economy work that they've been doing long before that term was ever known. So this one from Poppy from the Wall Street Journal. The headline reads, "Severe drought could threaten power supplies." We've read that headline multiple times. This one has a new twist. "Severe drought could threaten power supply in the West for years to come," is the new additional twist, because water elevation at California's dams is not only at their lowest points ever, but continue to drop. And now it might take years for them to become useful again in generating hydroelectric power. So that's a new additional concerning twist. The next one, also from Wall Street Journal, is that quantum computing company called PSI Quantum, or Psi Quantum, depending on how it's pronounced, has landed a $450 million investment from BlackRock to build its quantum computer. And that's potentially fantastic, by the way, because quantum computers, along with genetic engineering, along with VR, there's some of these technologies that could truly be revolutionary and game-changing. Quantum computers, absolutely one of them. And I'm optimistic. It's good to see lots of huge fundraisings like that. 450 million is a lot of money that hopefully will get them to where they need to get to in terms of building a quantum computer. It's certainly, with all of that fundraising and with Google, doesn't need to raise funding on their quantum computer. And but it looks like we're making good progress on that front. Jason, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I just had a question about the quantum computer addition to our infrastructure here. when one group has the ability to compute in that
Mm-hmm.
system, doesn't that make the IT departments of every other company worry who do not have it?
Yes, it's
Because doesn't that make the
yeah, it gives
yeah
asymmetrical
go yeah
advantages. Yes, exactly right. So, and this is why, like Sam from Y Combinator or Open, he's left Open AI, did a blog post a few months ago that in the not so distant future, if you think wealth distribution is already has a large gap between the 1%, the haves and the have-nots, you've seen nothing yet, because when quantum computer comes online, those who have it will have a wildly asymmetric advantage in generating wealth for like a 10 million to 1. So you're going to see the haves, which will be the Googles and the other, big tech companies that are building these, will have essentially a nuclear bomb in the Bronze Age era. It would be almost as if UFO type technology, gap between the haves and the have-nots, and that means, by extension, an economic gap that is far bigger than what we even have today. And for the example, the top 5 biggest companies are, by market cap, are Apple and Google and Facebook and Microsoft, and they're all going from 1 trillion. They all started reaching 1 trillion. They're already passing 2 trillion. They'll very soon get to 3 trillion. All the other industries have never ever broken 1 trillion, and that is growing parabolically. So when quantum computers come on, they could run up to 10 trillion relatively quickly. So it's this, if this friction that we're sensing between big tech and how powerful they are, you've seen nothing yet. If they harness the power of quantum computers, it's going to become even a national security issue with the countries, in the same way that we often talk about which countries are nuclear in terms of their defense systems, and it's well known there's just a handful of them. Well, quantum computing also will be the handful of countries that have them, and they will have asymmetrical power over all of the others as well, economically as well.
This is very analogous to, especially given the who can has access to this. So when machine guns came out, right, it was militaries that had it, and it gave them an asymmetrical advantage on the battlefield. But once peacetime came and the machine guns made its way into the criminal element, the gangs, that really changed the game in the 20s. You'd have gangs that would roll in with a machine gun or two, and literally go rob the bank, get in a fight with the cops on the way out, kill all the cops, and go to the next town and not be able to do anything about it. And my big concern is, yes, these large companies have this weapon, but what happens when the criminal element has quantum and can crack every password, crack every key, crack everything? I think, the governments are going to step in when that
It's
happens.
The governments need to step in before that. Back in the 90s, as we were architecting a multi device web experience, I was an evangelist at Sun for Java consumer stuff. I was right in the room, as it were. You know, part of what we sought to do is establish this utility grade type of concept. You know, we used to use the word web tone. Okay, a piece of that, or part of the attribute of that, was the personalization experience. Tech, over since the beginning of tech, with the core value proposition, aside from everything else, is empowerment. Empowerment to do something. And to this other concept of domestication of technology is a key theme here as well. But you may have heard me say things about deployment grade software and services. With all the cybersecurity issues, with these AI, Tyler, as you know, and you've been sharing here a lot here, is the competitive advantage and disadvantages is very clear with regards to the growth of this AI. But we do need to really define a means to domesticate the equity of these new exponential technologies, so that everybody has access to it, not just the FANG. If that's something that they want to go run off with, we ought to have a word, or the government should have a word about that. This should be something that's shared to small business and to all the consumers around the planet.
If they're going to make
And
APIs available, basically, but that keeps the power in their hands. That's good.
Using Chris's machine guns analogy, I think access won't be a problem. But if you look at machine guns came in 1930s, but then came the AK-47. The innovation which happened with that easy access, it's like the easiest machine gun. Even child can use those machine AK-47, and they use it in Africa. Anyways, so the kind of disruptive things which people are going to build on top of it, with it's unimaginable. That's the scary part. It's not the access, but what will people do when that access is provided to most of us? Then yeah, that's going to be a problem.
Okay.
It makes me think of the quote from Eric Severide from long ago that the chief cause of problems is solutions. Like, just think, you can think of all the positive things that can come out of this, but it's hard to imagine, and there will be many, many big problems that come out of it as well.
So Amazon is in the news. Bloomberg's headline says Amazon funding spurs union exodus from consumer group board. 3 major unions have quit the board of the nation's oldest consumer advocacy organization, claiming funding from Amazon has kind of ruined the party. Claiming the funding from Amazon has compromised the group's progressive mission. In separate letters last month, the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers, the Communications Workers of America, and the United Auto Workers Union wrote that their groups were resigning immediately from their roles on the board of the National Consumers League, citing the Seattle-based e-commerce giant's involvement with the group. Oh, wow. So Amazon's fighting back against the union's own kind of multilateral organization structure. That's kind of wild. 3 major unions have quit the board of the kind of union of unions. The United Unions. I'm trying to make a UN joke. What UN is to countries, this would be for unions. Interesting. So, because Amazon's funding the UN of unions, and that's causing them to resign because they want to unionize Amazon. But now, in the same way that China's influencing the UN, Amazon's influencing the Union of Unions, and it's kind of kneecapping them. It's kind of brilliant. Interesting article. Thank you for that one, Faraz. Just tweeted that one out to the Tech News Twitter account. And so the next interesting one is from the Wall Street Journal that L'Oreal's new digital chief takes cosmetics virtual, as Mita Dubey is exploring how online games, augmented reality, and social media can help the French cosmetics company reach new demographics. There you go. And is Johan still with us from Gothenburg, or did Johan jump out? And welcome, Florina. Johan, are you around? No?
No.
Okay. He sent in one about a ransomware attack on K through 12 schools. Ransomware attacks against the education sector almost doubled from 2019 to 2020 with the onset of the COVID pandemic. The cybersecurity posture of this sector of EdTech is still not sufficiently robust, and hence is low-hanging fruit for threat actors. And the next one is just a quick headline from The Guardian in the UK that the US could see 200,000 COVID cases a day again. The unvaccinated are sitting ducks is the quote from the director of the NIH, National Institutes of Health, pleads with Americans to get their shots as Delta variant ravages the country. And you were warned here in Tech News Around the World from Asia that Delta's a whole different thing.
And let's call out specifically, because we're not used to doing that, the youngest.
Yeah.
It's a new segment.
Yes.
That when we hear messages like this, we just don't think about them because during alpha and beta, they weren't a big vector. But now there are real, pediatric ICUs in entire states are being overran, and it's just keep that in mind that we've got millions of children that are unvaccinated.
Yeah, that's a good point. That Delta's causing, it's obviously affecting children more than Alpha was, and that is a huge concern with future variants, that they will continue to reach younger demographics. So Dr. Danish has an article from the LA Times that is relevant to the topic. It says major study of ivermectin, the anti-vaccine crowd's latest COVID drug, finds no effect whatsoever. So the LA Times saying major study of ivermectin touted as a treatment of COVID by the anti-vaccine crowd has no effect, according to a major study. Professor Asif, just jumping on, any comment on ivermectin?
I think the data, I'm not sure, but I think the data wasn't that convincing, was it? I can't really comment on
Okay.
it. I haven't been following. I've been following the Afghanistan because one of my staff, her family are,
Okay. Well,
and she's been on BBC and
we'll
Sky
get
News. So
we'll get
sorry.
to that one just in a minute. Sweltering heat in Hong Kong, extreme weather events worldwide signal need to act on climate change, scientists say, and that's according to the South China Morning Post. Extreme weather has wreaked havoc on livelihoods and local economies and caused billions of dollars in damage, offering clear evidence the world must act now. So just tweeted that one out. And the president of Argentina open to adopting cryptocurrencies as legal tender. Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina, stated he is open to the adoption of a crypto as a legal tender in an interview this week. That was predicted by Ame and myself and others that we thought South America seems like the where this could all kind of get a domino of world leaders down there kind of working together on that. And anyway, the next one is from South China Morning Post, and which is a Chinese publication. It says why U.S.-China trade talks are failing to take off, and they conclude as a subheadline, the real complication is the lack of political motivation to push for substantial dialogue and China's loss of hope in the U.S., say observers. Trade is on the back burner as the two sides cross swords over security, the high-tech sector, and ideology. And this is by Wendy Wu. And I think Wendy might not have heard from the U.S. side that the U.S. is just with decoupling. We are withdrawing. It's kind of a failed marriage, and we're back on Tinder. And that's really what's going on, Wendy. We're done. We're domesticating anything that we were dependent on China for, and you're going to be all on your own to patrol your own imports and exports. So you better build that navy very, very quickly. So the next big article is from Faraz via Bloomberg that regulators draw top pay to help firms decode the China crackdown. So Bloomberg, keeping up with their incredibly tone deaf stance on the Chinese tech crackdown, where they just continue to write articles
They're
that they
Tyler. They're the friend who's helping the friend hide the fart that they won't admit to cutting. It's like
yeah.
it's a two-man. Whoever smelt it dealt it with
So they
Bloomberg.
say
They're just kind of playing
the
this game.
headline says regulators earn $460,000 to help firms decode China's crackdown on big tech because they can't figure it out. What could possibly be driving this crackdown in all across China lately? Companies in China are scouring ministries and regulators for officials willing to cross over and help them navigate. Oh, now I see what they're saying. So this is genius, actually. Willing to cross over and help them navigate a sweeping crackdown of the private sector. So what it is the private sector in China understands that the government is moving the markets tremendously. If they crack down on ed tech, boom, billions of dollars are changing hands very quickly. The market is moving incredibly quickly at China speed. And if you can predict what the regulators are going to regulate next, you can make $1 billion overnight. So the question is, can you get one of these influential regulators to tell you what's going to be regulated next? And if they do, that's worth a lot of money. And so regulators draw $460,000 to help firms decode China's crackdown, meaning what's going to be regulated next, so that they can place their bets on red or black or on the roulette table of the stock market.
But what I'm getting at is that article we read yesterday where Bloomberg was willing to go threaten people
Yeah.
or try
Yeah.
to hurt people if they'd said anything about
Yeah.
China really indicates that they're just playing a shell game
Yes.
here, playing like, gee, we don't know why they're doing this. Look, let's dig in. Here's why we think it's because they're
Yeah.
authoritarian. We don't think it's related to birth
Yeah.
rate. We
Yeah. It's wild.
and like they just kind of are. It's like they're an accomplice now, is what I'm getting at. It's like, you have a magician and you have someone in the crowd, and it's like, let me pick someone from the crowd to come up here. I've never met you
Yeah.
before, right? New York Times, I've never seen you before. What number am I? What number are you
Yeah.
thinking?
I
And
kind of
that's
have a
how they go
question
about
real quick
Go,
on this.
Robert.
This is Robert. How is this any different from our lobbying?
it. It's not.
good. Good question, Robert. It's same but different, as we say in Thailand. It's the execution is done differently. There's different ways to skin a cat, as they say, but the net result is obviously has similarities. And we often point that out, that often a lot of this is not unique to any one country. And many of the criticisms that, the headline is talking about China in this case, but, America does it in its own way. Typically, how it's different is China just does it much more efficiently, much more quickly. And America does it in a much more slower, drawn out legal framework, where, there they aren't encumbered by this kind of slower overly complicated legal process where all lawyers get involved.
Pesky human rights.
Yeah, that too. So the India is the subject of the next headline from Bloomberg about this incredibly cool electric e-scooter, which I love the look of this thing. I just tweeted it out to the Tech News Twitter account. Ola Electric Mobility Company priced its electronic scooter at $1,348 in an attempt to crack the affordability barrier of electronic two-wheelers, and it's backed by SoftBank and Tiger Global. Thank God. I cannot wait for this thing. It looks even better than just for those who don't know, in Southeast Asia and Asia generally, these little two-wheeled scooters are the main means of getting around anywhere throughout all of Asia. So these are electric. Today they're all gas, and it's the Honda Click is, by far the most popular scooter on the planet, and they cost about $1,500. They're incredibly fuel efficient. I should tell you that for $3 you can ride for a week on these things anyway. So obviously a huge advantage over a car. But if you could make an e-scooter and make it for the same price, even $100 less, $100 less than the Honda Click, everyone would switch to this vehicle if it was even $100 less. So India's Ola electric e-scooter for $100 less than the Honda Click, if it has similar speed and similar power, it has a similar design. It's clearly inspired by the Honda Click design. This could be tremendous. We can see that.
Then all you need is a little solar panels just to charge it at like each one of the stations or whatever, and then it's like you got a bunch of opportunities for local entrepreneurs to like set little charging stations.
Yeah.
I mean, all sorts of.
You have a great point.
And one of the solar panels, you can do like little cell phone chargers along with it. Life gets great.
You have a really good point, which is that solar panel charging for cars, you need a lot of time under a bunch of solar panels to effectively get, cars are very power intensive relative to scooters, which is why you can go for a week on $3 of gas. So you can use solar. You could essentially charge this scooter anywhere where you park it. When you go to the supermarket, if they have an electric charger, the time that it takes you to do the grocery shopping, you would make up whatever energy you spent getting to the supermarket. So the electric charging stations for e-scooter bikes would be actually very useful, where in cars they're not. If you drive your car to the supermarket, you would not replace the energy you spent in the time that you charge the car at the supermarket. So this is again is why the electric scooters are so interesting.
Also, Tyler, these scooters are not meant for like intercity travel. They're just meant for like local travel.
Right.
So you can as well just come back to your home and charge it. Whereas cars, you go from one place like to different city, and so that the whole use case is very
Yes,
different.
you say that, but you and I both know that, or at least Lakeisha and I know, people often use these scooters to go from one city to another, because they have the high end speed is about 120 kilometers per hour, about
Woo!
70 miles an hour. That's why I said that's the Honda Click. That's why I'm hoping this.
And you mean moped, not like a stand-up scooter,
Yes,
right?
it's like a moped. Yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah,
beautiful.
kind of originally based on the Italian mopeds.
How about all those bikes that they had were clogging up the streets and everything else, and then China decided let's get rid of all these bikes, and they did this huge campaign where they cleaned out. Oh, well, actually, the company went bankrupt, right? They cleaned out all
They
these bikes,
exported
and
them overseas.
Yeah, they
that's
even
true.
brought them to Stockholm, the World Bikes, the kind of electric bike sharing programs.
I had a friend that was saying that essentially it's the only time he's ever seen like litter on the streets of Singapore was all these China bikes, essentially, because they're like, oh yes, we'll take some bikes from you, and all the sidewalks apparently for a few
Yeah, they
months.
were really junk bikes. This happened in Stockholm, by the way, and the guy who was managing that whole thing, it was a Chinese guy in Stockholm who made an announcement at my event that you can use all these bikes now in Stockholm, and it was like a bunch of people in the audience jumped up to say those things are crap, they don't work, they're broken. Um, yeah, David.
The in tech room, but whenever you guys want, Heyman. So anytime you guys
Okay,
want, I'll be over
okay.
there. Okay, take care.
I just wanted to just chime in on the idea that, or on the point, really, that government has a role. And just like government helps subsidize the deployment of the Tesla cars, um, as these bikes and lower cost electric vehicles start to be available, dramatically lower, the government to be equitable to the types of income levels that people to use these types of bikes, they need to really do the same thing, which is to provide some means of tax credit or
Yeah,
something to help be
that would
equitable.
be amazing. So, by the way, I'm on the olaelectric.com website, and it says that the top speed is 115 kilometers per hour. So they are aiming exactly at the Honda Click specs, which is not a surprise because that is the default vehicle for Asia. So you're going to have to make something very comparable to get people to switch over. It comes in 10 colors, large boot space.
Oh, these look great.
Yeah, the design's quite stunning. So I'm tweeting out the link directly to the Ola website, where apparently they've now announced the price. 181 kilometer range. It goes 0 to 40 kilometers in 3 seconds. So it's the same specs.
I'll take 300 million, please.
I'd like to race them. I want to pimp it out and race it. I want, that's what they should do. You could do a Fast and Furious and make a movie. There you go. There's a marketing campaign.
Yeah. Okay. So
What you really need is a Disney movie. Is it like Luca? Essentially, is an entire movie about some kids that eat ice cream and happen to be sea monsters. That's irrelevant. And their whole life dream is to basically get a Vespa Italian
Vespa.
scooter. So all you just need essentially is the Asian version of this, like Raya Last Dragon or something. Some new Disney movie, but it's all about trying to get an Ola electric scooter, and it's the children's entire life purpose is to buy this scooter and to do whatever it takes to get this thing. And then by the time the kids grow up, essentially the world will be solved. Climate change is a thing in the past, and life is good.
When I was
I
raised,
love
when
that idea.
I
You
grew up
got
in
there
Los
first, Chris.
It should take place in Vietnam because everybody has a scooter in Vietnam.
That would be awesome. I grew up in
And
Las
they run
Vegas.
in all
Sorry.
directions, fast and furious, scary.
This whole scooter idea, Ola model. So there was a company called Ether Energy, and there was one more startup who started in 2015. I shouldn't say this, but Ola just ripped off their model, scaled it, colored it, and just put it out there. But you have to give it to Bhavish. He is the guy who can scale it, and people can come up with a lot of innovation, but no one can scale it. So he did it.
Making it cool with older teenagers and 20 somethings would be very, very a very impactful thing to do. I used to race my 69 Z28 in Vegas in high school, and there is a whole culture there that could use some reinvigoration in terms of the vehicle that people have when they're first just starting out their adult life.
I think if you go electric competitions, it needs to go the other way. It needs to see how far you can go on a kilowatt.
Hey, there you go. I mean, like, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of like, speed demon competitions and like drag racing things. Just having like an endurance thing on like the electric scooters, going, hey, I've outride this thing. Essentially, I've modified the battery chemistry, and now I can essentially go just this amount of distance on this amount of wattage.
It's on like Seinfeld when Kramer goes below empty, and he's like, "Things are never going to be the same after this."
Hey, if you had enough people, like just throwing this out there, if you had someone just completely overwhelm the market, like you kind of saw us with the Tesla or something, they kind of set the benchmark on where you have the charging stations, how far away they are, like, roughly how much space you need between them, kind of just getting that kind of thing established. If you can have an electric vehicle company or electric vehicle scooter company just overwhelm the region, there is some benefit of having some sort of pseudo standardization around that. And one of the benefits of that could literally just be essentially cultural acceptance aspects of going, oh yeah, if I hop on my scooter, I know exactly the range I can get on that, and we can adjust the signage and the things to do with that. And if it increases, it happens to increase for the entire region all at once. There are some benefits to that.
Okay, we got to run through. Yes,
Tyler, you need to
already
unlock
did.
the Canadian room. Yeah, thank you.
Aramco joins group building giant solar plant in Saudi Arabia, which is a kind of interesting headline. Saudi Aramco is like the world's largest oil company, and to see them go big on a giant solar plant in Saudi Arabia is quite interesting. Saudi Aramco is joining a group led by ACWA Power to build nearly $1 billion solar power plant in Saudi Arabia as the world's largest oil exporting nation, which is Saudi Aramco. That's the state-owned oil company. So the next article is from Poppy via ZDNet. The headline reads, "Watch out, GPT-3. Here comes AI-21's Jurassic language model. By optimizing the trade-off of depth and width and expanding the vocabulary of the program, Tel Aviv startup AI-21 aims for a comparable or better results than the famous GPT-3. And the next headline from Bloomberg via Faraz says, world's third busiest port remains partially shut in China. China's Ningbo Zhaoshuan container port, the world's third busiest, remained partially closed for a 6-day Monday amid ongoing concerns over COVID was the reason last week. And then been closed for 6 days, sparks concerns that Delta could fuel port disruptions elsewhere. As China battles with Delta, we're now going to see supply chain friction due to the shutdowns and with China's the world's third largest port. Google and Facebook new cable to link Japan and all the other countries in Asia, basically, is the headline from Bloomberg, which will happen in 2024. If
Sorry,
yes.
Tyler, the room is still locked.
Then he screwed it up because I opened it.
I don't know. I went there; it's still locked.
Then he.
Anyhow, anywho.
Nope, it's not locked.
I just went there; it's locked, and he says it's locked.
Yeah. Then he can delete the room and reopen it.
Can you jump